going to call us together at 1 o'clock. As you notice, I am chairing the meeting today. Mrs. Zorks has a sick child at home. So I am stepping in. I'm going to I did call the meeting to order at 1 o'clock. The purpose of the workshop is our superintendent's workshop, and I'm going to recognize Dr. Moore to discuss and explain the purpose of the workshop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a number of items to present to the board today. I will set them up, and then Cabinet will present their assigned responsibilities. Just as we look at the overflow of the day, Mr. Fagan will begin the work speaking through surplus property, as well as an update regarding the CARES Act information requested by our board. Mr. Bass will provide information on our out-of-field report, our review of a new policy in which we are excited to bring, as well as the 5-year district capital work plan, and then a conversation with the board regarding legislative priorities, good dialogue in order to create those priorities, or begin the process of creating those priorities. And then I will lead 2 conversations with the board, one of which is around Executive Order 2069 and the board's desire on how we continue to implement that, if it is or is not extended. And then a update regarding our transition back for the second 9 weeks as it relates to COVID. During that time, I'll provide information on our plan or design moving forward to accommodate all students in our community to ensure that we're providing quality education for all children, and excited to present that to the board and get feedback. But we will start with Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Soup. Through the chair. First item we have is surplus property. There are no buses on this list. There's approximately 15 items. They've all deemed to be unservable or obsolete. Once they are declared obsolete, they will go up for auction, and the proceeds will come back to the district.
Board members, any questions? Mrs. Barenborg.
Yes, I did notice a batting cage for the baseball team, I guess, at Vero Beach High School. Was that purchased by a booster club?
Through the chair, no, ma'am, it would have to be purchased through us in order to come on this list.
That's what I was wondering, because it says booster, so I didn't know if that was Booster Club or if that had something to do with the type of equipment it was.
Through the chair, let me find out a little bit more detail, and I'll get you an answer before the
Okay,
end of
because
the
I was
day.
curious whether or not Booster Club equipment does come off our list. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Board members?
Yeah, I've got a clarification. Once a booster club gives something to the high school, wouldn't it become our property?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you.
Go ahead.
So if it becomes our property, then just curious if it's obviously they'd probably want another one. So would the school district be responsible for paying for that, or would the booster club then?
Through the chair, for purchasing of a new one,
Yes,
the booster would be responsible for
that's
that
what I
purchase.
thought. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, sir.
Through the chair, moving on. Next item is approval of the CARES and adult educational grants. There are approximately 7 grants. The total amount of the grants is approximately $4.7 million. The list of the grants consists of items that are specifically related to CARES, and there's one also for TCTC, which is their Adult Education and Family Literacy Grant, which is one of their main operating grants. One of the questions that was asked at the prior meeting is, of the CARES grants, how much or what percentage will assist the district in offsetting ongoing 2021 expenditures? Of the total amount that we see here of the $4.7 million, there's approximately $1.4 million of items in these grants that either, one, the district will be able to reimburse ourselves back for items purchased prior to June, or 2, items we were able to shift from the 2021 budget to the CARES grant.
Board members?
Yes.
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fagan, as we discussed at a previous workshop, we had a few issues regarding putting out some district money for food services that was a little over where we thought we would be as far as giving meals out over the summer. I'm curious if, because we took such a concerted effort to make sure that we were meeting the community's needs, we're able to use some of the CARES Act money to cover that shortfall?
Through the chair, yes and no. Through the CARES, we were able to move $10,000 of food service items that were purchased, that were for delivery of food during spring break, which the food service program does not allow. So CARES did pick up that portion, but we were not able to move any additional.
So going forward, and I guess this is a question for Dr. Moore, when you consider items in response to needs that this pandemic or any future issue may be how we meet those needs how will the district make better, more informed decisions as to how we can help the community within the funding that we receive through the CARES Act, which is meant for that type of support?
Through the chair, also remember most of your CARES money is for new initiatives.
I understand that
Okay.
that additional food we were giving out, we kind of doubled up on our efforts, and so I would imagine that a portion of that would be considered new.
Through the chair, I'd have to clarify that with DOE.
Yeah, it was quite, can you tell me again how much money we went over in the food services? Was it six?
Believe we booked a receivable from general fund in approximately $650,000.
That's a lot of money, $650,000. It's a lot of money, and while I've not questioned, the validity of that use of funds in this instance, I do think it behooves us to take every opportunity to try to recoup some of those funds.
And through the chair, the plan is for this year is for food service to pay general fund back this year.
Thank
So
you.
at the end of this year, that will be a zero receivable.
Without there being any type of ramifications for students and families.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Because we had discussed bringing the food cost down, the lunch cost down.
Through the chair, we're looking into that also, yes, ma'am.
Right, okay, great, thank you.
Mrs. Rosario? I have a follow-up for that. Mr. Fagan, if the food services has to refund the general fund for those costs, then wouldn't that put food services at a deficit?
Through the chair, it all depends on this year's projections of revenue over expenditures. We're currently looking at that operation to see if we can do any streamlining and downsizing of expenditures.
And then what happens if all of said and done, and food services comes up short? Then we have to supplement the deficit that food services may have at the end from our general fund?
Through the chair, you have two choices in that scenario. One, you can run a negative fund balance and put it on your financials, which is kind of a red light. Or two, you simply book a receivable from general fund to cover that in the anticipation that it will be covered within the following year.
Or if we have anything left over from CARES or new money coming in from CARES, we may be able to cover that difference.
Through the chair, absolutely. If any additional revenue sources come in or the review of any other federal programs of where we could shift any expenditures, we'll do that and cover that as well.
Yeah, I think part of the planning for food, though well-deserved, might be some instances where we offer dinner as well. In the regular year, we never offered dinner. And there were some periods of time during the quarantine that dinners were provided, which were great, and some weekends were also provided as well. So where children need to eat, you will never find an argument with me on that. Children need to eat. But to make sure that we are not falling in a deficit in any other areas, I would just urge that if any new monies come in from CARES, that we would make that a priority to ensure that we're not at a deficit in our health services department. In our food services department.
Through the chair, on an ongoing monthly basis, we're going to be looking at all revenue and all finances and all expenditures, seeing if there's any movement we can do and any trends that where we can shift expenditures in order to make sure this doesn't happen in the future.
Thank you.
Quick question. Is there an easy way you can explain how these numbers are calculated at the state level, like how they are proportionately divided for each district? Required local effort is divided a certain way, our FTEs is calculated a certain way. Is there some algorithm or some formula that has them, how do they determine how much we get in each category?
Through the chair, the one I'm most familiar with is the 3.3 million that we received directly. My understanding, that was a calculation developed by DOE. Exactly how, I do not have that detail. We can find it.
So we have no idea how these numbers, on what basis these numbers are calculated to, in each category, but to reimburse our expenses. There's just an amount, we just get it, we have no idea how that's determined.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. The last one we received was approximately $200,000 for sanitation and cleaning. Simply got an email that says you're entitled to $200,000. If you want it, submit the toolkit and we'll cut you the check.
Is there any merit to understanding how those are calculated, or do we just take the money and?
Through the chair, pretty much take the money and run. The other
I
argument
suspected
is
that.
you could come back and argue I'm entitled to more, but by the time it gets to us, someone's already determined that's what your allocation is going to be.
Yeah, I'm just curious how do they arrive at these numbers, and how is it proportionately distributed to all of the 67 districts?
Through the chair, most of it is a proportionate share, but remember, there's that huge, large of money that DOE got. Some of it they kept at the governor level, some of it was pushed out. I can be happy to reach out to DOE and see if I can get a better description, but as of right now, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Thank you. Mrs. Rosario, then Mrs. Justice?
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore and I spoke about this privately in our meeting last week. One of the questions that I asked was, are any of the new positions that are funded through the CARES grant, such as the guidance counselor positions, are any of those sunset positions? Have they been recorded as sunset positions because they're covered through the CARES Act? And Dr. Moore, would you mind sharing the response to that, please?
Absolutely, through the chair. Those are positions allocated to schools based on SAM, school-based allocation model, not designated to sunset, but it does afford us the opportunity to have a great deal of flexibility. So the opportunity presented itself because that was a new initiative in which we were implementing at the same time that very restricted dollars came in, and one of the allowable expenses were new initiatives. So that has been very beneficial to us to have that, a level of flexibility where other districts weren't able to experience that.
So then at the end of the year, Dr. Moore, those positions that have been new to fulfill this will then be, what will happen, that we'll absorb them within the general fund?
Absolutely. So that money remains where it is right now. To be completely transparent, that's a big piece of the money that we'll be able to use pending a shortfall in our second survey, depending on how the state interacts with us. So we've positioned ourselves in a way to brace for what is the worst case scenario. And as we roll into next year, we'd be able to absorb it through the school-based allocation model.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Moore or Mr. Fagan, has the county reached out to you at all to ask how they can assist in getting schools up and running and using some of the CARES Act money? I know that they received, I think, around $9 million in CARES Act money from the state.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. I did speak to Jason, and we went over some requirements that we had going in the future regarding PP&E that we feel that we'll definitely will need in the immediate future. He was aware we had the $3.3 million. Most of their budget has been, his allocation has been committed. However, he's agreed to meet with me and talk to me probably in October and November to see, okay, what are your needs looking like, and maybe they can carve some out. But no firm commitment.
Great, and I would imagine that this kind of goes hand in hand in hurricane work that we do with them as well, right? Those types of relationships where we can work together to meet the community's needs.
Yes, ma'am, through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you.
I was unaware of that, but if there is a need, if there is an offer on the table, let's take advantage of that. It will only benefit
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
children.
Also, if I may follow up on the pitching machine, the pitching machine was donated by the boosters, but there was no purchase for it. So they donated it, it's become obsolete, and it comes off our books. Also, the Florida Department of Agriculture reverses all grab-and-go lunch through 2020.
Right, but it's still taxpayer money.
Correct, absolutely.
I mean, I think it's important to remember there isn't a money tree that's, producing money, especially for CARES Act,
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Nothing else? All right, thank you. Stop it.
All right, good afternoon. I have the First item I have is the out-of-field report. Sorry. Dr. Moore's throwing me off now.
Glasses.
Out-of-field report. When first getting here to the district and looking at the out-of-field report, saw we had a lot of work to do, and we accomplished a lot through the last time you saw it, second semester, and today. However, it's not apples and apples that we're comparing to. Let me give you some numbers. For this year, we have a total of 111 teachers out of field. 39 of those are out of field due to ESOL. If you go back to last year, we had 100 teachers out of field, 91 of those due to ESOL. So where's the difference? The difference is the 3 split platforms that we have. We've got some teachers who may be doing a transitional class in an area that they're not certified for, so that completely puts them in this out-of-field list. You've got, also, we had to factor in the teachers who have accommodations, and we've got many of those doing virtual, and particularly in the secondary, they're doing Edgenuity. So it's really they're managing the content that the student is working on, and a lot of those are going to be out of field. So it's really is not a good reflection of how we would be normally. However, there is work to do. There's still those 39 ESOL teachers, and we'll be working on those to get those as close to zero as we can. But that is the out-of-field list.
Mrs. Rosario, Mrs. Barrenborn?
Yep, I did.
And Mrs. Justice?
If you look this way, sometimes I might be first.
You want to go? That's fine.
It's hard to
You
look
can
at
go
both
first.
sides of
It's
my
okay.
head.
So out of the 91 teachers that were out of field for ESOL, and there's
39 now.
39 now, does that mean that all of those teachers received certification, or does that mean they're just not in classes where they're teaching where that certification is
They're
necessary?
going to receive the certification, because you've got 3 years to get your ESOL certification.
Just because you have 3 years doesn't
I
mean you
think
get
it's
it.
a combination of both, I apologize. Effective master scheduling and assignment. So Mr. Meyer and his team, in looking at which teachers were assigned to which particular class, bit in the reduction of that number, as well as the offering through Title I office and providing that free training for teachers. So the combination of those two things made a significant reduction in the number of ESOL out-of-field reports.
Mrs. Rosario, then Mrs. Barrenborn?
Thank you. This is an area that has always been a concern of mine, that the fact that our out-of-field ESOL lists for the past several years have been pages and pages and pages. And it's always been a concern because of the number of ESOL students that we have in our district. We currently have, do we have those? 21%, I think? I think it's 21% ESOL approximately. It's certainly more than our African-American population.
Well, so
It
I
is
have a
the
question.
fastest growing.
I just have a question for you. Is ESOL
English as a second language.
correct? But just because someone may identify themselves as Hispanic doesn't mean that they are
No,
going
that's
to be.
different.
Okay,
These
yeah,
are just
that's my-
students who are receiving ESOL services. English as a second language are students whose first language is other than English, and who have, maybe they are immigrants coming into the system, and/or need
wanted to ask
those
the clerk.
services, yeah. And so we certainly have more there. It's not significantly more, it's not a great number more than our African-American population, but we certainly have a lot of students who receive ESOL services. And it's always a concern of mine when we have teachers who are out of field. This could be accomplished or minimized by scheduling, by strategic scheduling. I see Mr. Meyer and Mr. Bass both shaking their head, where you would schedule students specifically in classrooms that have teachers who are already ESOL endorsed, and then that lessens the number who are on your list out of field. But I have to say, moving in, I know Dr. Moore and I had this conversation in the spring when he joined us. I'm very pleased to see that our numbers have become this low. Very, very pleased. I mean, we are 52 positions or out-of-field assignments less than we were last year, not including the charter schools. So I'm very happy to see that. I wish we had none, but I'm very, very pleased with these numbers. Also, I have a question about how long someone can remain out of field. Dr. Moore mentioned this last week to me, but just a reminder, if you are out of field, is there a mandatory time limit for you to, what is it, to become in field? What are the requirements for that?
To obtain your certification.
Yeah.
You know, and this is interesting you asked this because in my prior district, we would give them 3 years, you know, as long as we brought them to the board saying that they're out of field. And then after the 3 years, we really started looking at, okay, you know, creating a deadline. Statutorily what is it statutorily?
So it depends, through the chair, it depends on what you're out of field for. So ESOL is one of the, they call endorsements. It's a 300-hour endorsement. So the only way to get that is to complete 300 hours of training. So you are supposed to complete what they call 6 semester hours, which is the equivalent of 60 professional development hours a year. So essentially, it could take you a couple of years, like Mr. Bass says, to get there. But maybe you're out of field for math. You only have the 1 year to make that progress. So it does depend on what you're out of field for. ESOL, you get a couple extra years because it does take a number of hours to complete, whereas math, you can just go take the test.
And we
So-
offer that as part of our professional development courses, don't we?
For the ESOL,
Yeah.
yes, through the chair, yes. And as Dr. Moore put it, it was a combination of credentialing additional teachers and the master schedule, and we were proud to get the number down. It would have been lower than 39, but we'll take it and we'll keep working. We're going to keep delivering more professional development and getting more teachers certified and keep working on the master schedules. 0 is going to be a fun day.
Yeah.
I don't know how soon we'll get there, but we're going to keep reducing it, absolutely.
And my last comment, if I may, what was interesting about this year's out-of-field assignments is that there were many more elementary, I see Dr. Moore with the pencil, there are many more elementary, out-of-field for elementary, which is pretty interesting, and when we had the conversation, Dr. Moore, would you like to talk to that?
Through the chair, and I think this is what Mr. Fagan would call housekeeping, and Mr. Bass not giving his team enough credit. And looking at the list, in ESE, if you are also teaching a core course, you need to be duly certified. And this happened in 2010 or 2011. So in review of the list, there were a number of teachers in elementary who have been teaching these same assignments in maybe a self-contained classroom in a elementary setting who did not have the elementary education certification. So this is an opportunity. Let's clean that up over the course of this year. I'm very confident a number of these individuals can go pass that assessment right off the bat. We were not capturing that. Not exactly sure why we weren't in the past, but right is right, so we want to present the information as it is and as we found it. And that's just part of really looking at everything as it comes to you over the course of the first year, defining and making sure it's correct. So that is a organizational improvement that in some cases makes us look not too good, but we will get it right.
No, I think it's great. I think the explanation that is needed, that you're giving is needed for us to understand why we're looking at the assignments that we have. ESOL endorsement is pretty, if anyone is, teachers in our district is interested in utilizing the services that we have in professional development to get that endorsement, I highly suggest that they do it. One of the things that I love about the area of ESOL, especially as an endorsement for teachers, for those who don't know, is that there are a lot of instructional strategies in the processing or in the teaching of ESOL that really allow teachers to differentiate the instruction in the classroom. And since differentiation is so important and critical when you have children of so many different levels, I just find that endorsement really leads the way for other benefits for children in the classroom than maybe some other endorsement,
Right.
if that makes any sense. But thank you for allowing me the time. And thank you for the good work on this.
Through the chair, one more thing I'd like to add. Mr. Smeltzer and Ms. Graham went over this extremely thorough, and there may be some on there that they did not want to miss, because one thing, when you have a FTE audit and you come back, you have someone that's out of field, you don't get the funding for it. So they really went through this closely.
Awesome.
And just before we move to the next item, if we are in fact doing that, 25% of a current total student population is Hispanic and 18% African American.
25. We went up.
Yeah, it
Last
was,
year,
I
think
believe
we
it was,
were probably
That's
20 or
that's
21.
Hispanic, that's net ESOL.
no, yes, just to
Right,
be clear.
that's my
Hispanic.
question.
Yes. Not ESOL, correct.
Okay, so having been an out-of-field teacher a few different times, I can tell you there are lots of different reasons for it. Sometimes it's because you moved to the state and the DOE hasn't caught up with you. And I can tell you that happened to me. It was not that I was out of field, it was the DOE hadn't really done my paperwork and finished it. So sometimes that's the issue. Sometimes the issue is you have to take an exam, and the exams sometimes aren't offered when you can take them, or they're full for months. So I do see that has been an issue for us in the past, DOE issues. So I'm hoping that's not part of this problem, but I also know that with ESOL, and I totally agree with you, Ms. Rosario, the ESOL courses that I took were extremely good because they helped me with any child. I don't know why we call them ESOL strategies. We should just call them good teaching strategies, because that's what they are. And I think any teacher that's saying, no, I don't want to go do that, because I do know there are teachers that think, well, this is coming around and it's going out. And they've thought that about educational initiatives lots of times. So I think working on those 39 people to get the ESOL endorsement extremely important, because they need it. The other thing I will say is, are we finding that with our new hires, they already have the ESOL endorsement? Because I know a lot of colleges are adding that to their programs.
It's a mixed bag. Some
It
do,
is.
some don't. I mean, and there really is no way to gauge.
Okay, and is
how
it
many of them
mostly
are-
in school, though? In-state schools are providing it?
in-state.
Okay, because if not, we should be
Yep.
knocking on their doors and saying we need that for teachers. Okay, so I wanted to make sure on that. The other thing I was a little concerned about, and I did talk to Dr. Moore about this, were the number of ESE teachers that I saw that were out of field, and that concerned me. I had known a couple of names that were on there that have taught in our district for years, and I was really surprised by that. But then I realized when you had that conversation with me why that happened, and that is because of what's happening this year. As they've been teaching virtually, or they've had other things added to their plate. And sometimes you're an in-field teacher, and all of a sudden you get one class added to you, and that one class puts you out of field. So I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Mrs. Justice. No, I just wanted a clarification on the students that would actually qualify for ESOL services, because it's obviously not just Hispanic students. There are many students that would qualify. So, we can talk about Hispanic demographics or African-American demographics. Out of the 25% of Hispanic students or other students within the district, how many students are qualifying or needing ESOL services? That's the question. I mean, we need to be clear about what we're asking.
Through the chair, let me just peruse I don't think I have the total number of ELL. What I was giving was the total number of students who are identified as being
So at
Hispanic.
19, we had,
I don't have that.
hold on, I was just looking at it. In 2019, the ELL students that and I don't have it out right now. I just had it up, but it wasn't 23%, so it was like 8% or something.
It's single digits, to the chair.
I can provide the actual,
Okay, I just wanted to be
Present, yeah,
clear. I mean, we have
yeah.
lots of people that are watching the meeting. We just need to be clear about what the numbers are and the students that we're speaking about.
Yeah, and just to close up, but two things. One, to clarify that ESOL is not only Hispanic students, that ESOL can be any other language, and we seem to be equating those in this conversation. I just want to make sure we're clear for the record.
I just mentioned that.
Yeah.
And that, is it possible, when we get lists like this, rather than getting them just in this form, that we can get them in a spreadsheet form so that we can manipulate the data at all? Like, if we want to cut it and just see strictly number of ESOL rather than counting up each one, a spreadsheet would be a lot easier to do that on.
through the chair, and we can also provide that information and a tally at the bottom.
That would be helpful, because
Even
there's a
eliminating.
couple,
yeah.
this is cut predominantly by school, but then you've got to count ESOL or, or by certification, or it would be easier to manipulate that in a spreadsheet.
Dr. Schiff, the ELL learners in 2019 were 5% or 887 students.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Thank you.
Mr. Bass?
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to the next item is bringing to you to amend policy, existing policy 2431. That policy is on interscholastic athletics. And before I start, I'd like to thank Ms. Rosario and her leadership in driving this particular move. This is a amendment to this policy that will really take great strides to keep our student athletes safe and identify health conditions that they may have that have gone undetected. What the policy proposes is that all middle school and high school student athletes would have to go through and get a electrocardiogram prior to each season starting. This is something that both athletic directors at our high schools right now are doing, and they're doing it through a voluntary basis, but this policy would make it be mandatory. And the company that is kind of working with us is who we play for. And I have Mr. Kurt Eason is here today, and he's going to give us a little presentation on their activities and their practices and the services that they provide to student athletes, to kind of give you a little overview of it. So, Mr. Eason, if you would.
Oh, we're going right up before the video?
We've actually,
Videos
Yeah.
tonight. But
That was heartfelt, that video. So where should I go?
the podium, sir. Thank you.
I have my executive director, Evan Ernst, here with me that I'd like to introduce as well.
And through the chair, I'd also like to point out and thank Mr. Seymour, because he has worked also getting this policy prepared and ready, and has worked with Mr. Easton.
I guess it would be polite for me to take off my mask and say hello, since I'm at the appropriate distance, aren't I? I'd just like to say, first and foremost, thank you for taking this action. It's something that is going to save lives of your children in this community. There is no doubt about that. You're now the third county in really the country to take this action. Brevard County and Osceola County have taken similar policy procedures themselves. And within the last year, because of that, we've screened about, and I'm going to throw these numbers out here, about 12 to 15,000 student athletes, and we've saved between 15, depending on how you calculate it, 15 lives. And the extension of that is that's just the ones that we screened, number one. But number two, quite often what happens is when we screen a student athlete and we detect a heart condition, quite often it's hereditary. And so then their families get tested. And in one particular incident, 7 family members were detected with this same life-threatening heart condition, and all of them were treated. So the implications of this go far beyond just the individual student athletes. And so for that, we say thank you for taking the action. Number two, thank you because it helps us to become much more efficient with our resources and with our ability to deliver this service. So what I'd like to do for a moment is I'd like to introduce one of my sons. I call all my players my sons. This one you can tell he's a lot like me. He's only about, he's a tiny guy. But this is Evan Ernst. Evan has really taken the lead in this cause in establishing this nonprofit through his teammates, my former players, as a Cocoa Beach High School soccer coach who lost a player to sudden cardiac arrest in 2007. And these kids went up to college at Florida State University and decided something needed to be done about this. And they created this nonprofit organization about 10 years ago and have screened 150,000 student athletes and saved more than 150 lives. So it's a tremendous tribute. I want to hand it over to Evan so he can talk a little bit about the process that we undertake. The fact of the matter is that we've been doing this here in in Indian River County at Vero Beach High and at Sebastian for a number of years, and have actually saved 6 students' lives here locally. So this is not something that's entirely new. The community is very grateful to you too. We were going to have them show up tonight, but we think that once you go to the public hearing on this, that we're going to ask a lot of the members of the community who have been impacted by this to show up and show their appreciation. So, Evan, if you would, talk a little bit about the process that we go through and what our service actually is.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you, Mr. Bass. Thanks, Mr. Rosario, for all the help to make this possible. It's been a long journey for us, and it's as full circle as it could possibly get right now. When we started this, we were in high school after watching our teammate die, Rafe. He had a heart condition that he passed every sports physical his entire life, and that heart condition never showed itself. And that was because in Rafe's case, and for thousands of kids across the country every year, the leading cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest, will be missed 90%, 96% of the time on the current sports physical. So we had no idea the standard sports physical for the Florida High School Athletic Association recommends in the fine print that every kid should have their heart checked. But when we figured that out, we became really obsessed with solving this problem because there's thousands of kids and a generation of kids whose lives are at stake. What makes this so full circle for me and Mr. Easton is that we got started in this because of Indian River County. When we were 16 years old, there was a family that is pretty famous in these parts that found $800 million in treasure, the Apt family, the Fisher family. And unfortunately, their grandson, Mel Fisher's grandson, Michael Apt Jr., he passed away here of cardiac arrest. And when our teammate passed away, they drove to Brevard County, and they spoke with all of us, and they spoke with Rafe's family, and they spoke with our coaches and our parents. And they told us that we weren't alone. And they told us how big of an issue this actually is. And they really opened to our eyes that you could do something. And back then, they donated Cocoa Beach High School 3 or 4 AEDs to help make sure that would never happen again. So since that moment, we reached back out to them when we were in college at Florida State, go Noles. We started working with them at Sebastian River High School and for the local Pop Warner teams and for Vero Beach High and for so many more here for close to a decade, 6 or 7 years. And we've screened a lot of kids here, and we've saved close to 6 to 10 lives, and it's been a privilege to bring this full circle. And it's a real honor to bring this now, to make it a requirement as we try and build this wave to advance the standard of care across Central Florida, across all of Florida, and across the United States of America. The way this program works and what's made it possible for who we play for, the nonprofit, is we're trying to shepherd in a good policy in these school districts by bringing together the world's leaders from Italy, where Dr. Policia, who's on our medical advisory team, serves. He passed, with many more in Italy, a policy in 1982 that made heart screenings required for every kid every year, every athlete. And their country reduced cardiac arrest by 90%. So our country, since 1982, we haven't moved the statistic 1 percentage point in America. And we put tens of billions of dollars in AEDs, in emergency action plans, and CPR, all stuff that needs to be done that saved a lot of lives. And it's totally worth it, every penny. But the issue of being the leading cause of death in schools, in kids, and in Americans hasn't even moved 1 percentage point. So we believe that this is the way you do it. You catch the problem at the root of the issue. You don't wait for a 3-minute drill where a coach has no idea what he's doing and a player has no idea what's going on. in the context of cardiac arrest. In the context of great coach. We beat Vero Beach. It's still a claim to fame 10 years later. Yeah, we're pretty good. Josh Posado, well done, buddy, if you're watching this. So the way we've been able to do this is by leveraging telehealth. We work with all the children's hospitals in the area. We do the results, we do the ECGs remotely. And we've done this again, Sebastian, Vero Beach. We do the ECGs remotely. We upload them to the cloud. We have expert pediatric cardiologists who are trained on what's called the international criteria, interpret the ECGs. And then within 3 to 7 business days, the results are delivered via email. Any families that have an issue, they get a phone call. We tee it up with their results. It has a copy of their ECG, a 1-page PDF on what the abnormality means, and then a list of local folks they can follow up with, pediatric cardiologists. And in places like Osceola and definitely Brevard, where there's a lot of transient students and there's a high student homeless population, we've never had one kid who's been unable to get the follow-up care that's been flagged. And that's because of these children hospitals like Nemours who've done such a fantastic job. And because of partnerships in the community, like in Brevard with the Brevard Health Alliance, in Central Florida with Shepherd's Hope, we're able to get kids who have no insurance in to be seen for free for the pediatric care that they need. We know that after doing this 150,000 times, 3% of the kids will be flagged for follow-up. So when we screen the 100 football players at Vero Beach High, JV, varsity, 2 to 3% will be flagged. And then about 0.05% of the time, they'll be flagged as higher risk. In our 3 categories, we have low risk, which is cleared to play. We have follow-up, which is a minor abnormality. And we have higher risk, which is 0.05% of the time. So through telehealth and community partnerships and the leadership of Indian River County, we think we can advance the standard of care and continue to do it. So if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer them. Mr. Bass, we presented to a couple years ago at the Heartland Educational Consortium. So this is really cool to bring together full circle with you as well, sir. So thanks for all the help on that.
Board members, questions?
Yep.
Sure. Mrs. Justice,
Can-
Mrs. Rosario.
Can you just read through the new part, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you guys.
Yeah,
I
I'm
appreciate it.
aware that you've done some work at our high schools. We've met some different times, and it's nice to see you
to see
again.
you.
This is a requirement for students, but they're also able to decline as well, Mr. Bass?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. So
I'm a little confused by that wording, to require something, but then I have an issue with that first part.
And actually, I talked to Ms. Diagresta, and Ms. Diagresta, if you would like to give the explanation for this, because she can do it much better than I can.
If we have any questions for our guests, maybe we could go to those so they don't have to stand at the mic while we question the staff. If there's anything specific to them, so you guys don't have
No,
to. stand there.
so I don't. Thank you again for coming. I've learned a lot about your program through the years. I have some questions as to cost, considering, I know that your organization has had some, had some evolution or some change over the past few years, as far as leadership and direction is concerned. So as a board member, I do have some concerns in requiring something that we may eventually be required to assume the cost of, not that it isn't a good thing to do, but certainly a fiscal requirement and needs to be considered in that fashion for us as well. That's
Well,
all of my questions.
If there's a specific question as it relates to cost and how this is paid for, essentially, it's the parent's direct cost when they sign up for the EKG screening, and that's a $20 expense. If for some reason they can't afford that, then we will cover that cost, and it's done differently in Osceola and in Brevard County. In Osceola County, they budgeted for anyone that couldn't afford it. And we were concerned because we thought, we based our assumptions on the school lunch programs. And we thought that there could be as many as 50% of the kids saying that they can't afford it and that we would be having to cover those. They covered the cost, and as it turns out, the actual number was closer to 5%. And so the overall budgetary impact in Osceola County was about $4,000. In Brevard County, the overall budgetary impact is zero because we've been working there for so long that we've donated our services for anyone that couldn't afford it there. And over the years, that's been about a $270,000 contribution. So that's how we cover our expenses. And by doing this, it allows us to be more efficient because now we can go to a school and know that we're going to have a number of kids there that will help to cover our expense through the $20 fee. But also it enables us to spend less time going out and doing fundraising and scheduling schools independently. It's now just a matter of routine.
Sure.
It's much more efficient.
And my questions would lie in, parents who can afford to do so in Osceola or Indian River County will be essentially, covering the costs of another county that may not be, that isn't, those parents are not being required to participate in the fee-based services in Brevard?
Yeah, so they are, and the way it works in Brevard, though, is the hospital systems have stepped up and underwrote, so Health First, Parish, and some others have put a pot together of about $50,000, and we fundraise year round about 10 grand
Right.
to pay for those
And,
kids.
and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Have we approached Cleveland Clinic in partnership to cover the costs for our students?
Through the chair, we have not yet.
So this is wonderful. I think there are still some questions regarding this and some details to work out. I would still like to, I think there are still some questions and some things to work out because I am very familiar with the Brevard program versus the Osceola program. Thank you for coming today.
Mrs. Rosara, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to thank them. I didn't have a question because we've talked in detail already. Board members, if you remember a few, I'm going to say more than just a few months ago, it was Dr. Moxley was here. I approached you all with the suggestion about moving forward with who we play for or providing heart screenings for students in our athletic programs. All of that got put on hold when Dr. Moore joined, and then, of course, COVID kind of put everything on halt at that point. But so all that to say that we have been in contact throughout the last several months, and Dr. Moore and Mr. Bass and I, so I don't have any particular questions. I will like to talk about the cost that Mrs. Justice is referring to. Dr. Moore and I and Mr. Bass, we've talked about this with the $20 impact for parents. The options are that parents can, if they have their own health insurance, they can opt to do it privately through their own health insurance. If they choose to do it with and through who we play for, the cost would be $20. And hopefully, Dr. Moore suggested that we would be able to cover the cost for any child who cannot afford it from that point on, or the fundraising portion from the athletic programs. So I don't know if either one of you want to talk to that point moving forward?
Through the chair,
Thank you.
I think that and going to Ms. Justice and what she said, that is the right way for us to go, is to go out and talk to our community partners. We're working with Cleveland Clinic right now to do rapid COVID testing. I've developed a relationship with Dr. Rothman, and that's somebody I'll go straight to and talk to about this. So I think that is our first avenue, again, a way to us to create a stronger partnership.
I think that's wonderful, and I think we should do that. I certainly don't want to miss on the opportunity of offering heart screenings for our students. I think it's the right timing, this is just a wonderful opportunity to save lives. With cardiac arrest being the #1 impacted disease that affects people as a whole, for children in our schools, it is certainly something that definitely goes unchecked in their general physical when they have to get a physical with their doctors. They do the temperature, they do the arm, the leg, everything pretty much physically, but there's no heart check to that. So I see the need, and it's my pleasure to have brought this forth, and I'm grateful to Dr. Moore and to Mr. Bass and Mr. Seymour for picking up the mantle and moving forward with this. So I hope that the board members will support this, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
I did see something about your organization a few years ago and did bring it to Dr. Rendell. Thank you for picking that up and running with it because it kind of fell apart, I guess. So not sure what happened with that, but I'm glad that we're doing this. I do have a question, though, about, and this isn't for you guys, this is for them, but thank you for what you do. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate
I
it.
do have a question about, whenever we do a policy and then there's an out, could you describe what a parent's, if they have a decision to decline, what that means?
Through the chair, I think it would be best if we defer to Mr. Gresta.
Because whenever we're putting a policy in place and we're saying it's a mandatory thing, I want to make sure that we understand what a parent's obligation is, because it's their child, they can make the decision.
Yes, Mrs. Bearwork, and this also goes to some of the other board members' questions as well a little earlier. The language that's been proposed in the to be added into the policy does make it a requirement that an ECG form is filled out as part of the athletic packet that the family fills out every year or every sports season whenever those documents are filled in. That particular form, one path, if you will, is to follow the process to have an ECG conducted on the student athlete, either through this organization or local medical professionals who would be able to do that. The second path is if a parent wishes to opt out. And there could be a variety of reasons why the parent does so. There may be a sincerely held religious belief that does not believe in medical procedures or medical analysis. And so the parent would certainly have a constitutional right to opt out if that were the situation. I would also say that a parent may have, as a family, a sincerely held belief of not believing in medicine, the typical medical interventions that you or I may wish for our child. There may be a family who does not believe in that sort of thing, and so a family or a parent would certainly have the same right as they would for required immunizations to opt out there. They would have the same right to opt out for this sort of thing. And in the policy, there's a reference to this form or this report, and that's the document that the superintendent and I'm sure his staff would include the nitty-gritty steps that the paths the parents that could follow. That form is what would then drive them either into one category or another as far as having the analysis done or opting out and not having it done. And then if you also look further into the policy where no changes are being proposed, but it's the portion of the policy that speaks to appropriate administrative procedures put in place by the superintendent, those are the procedures, the details of this would then be outlined in superintendent administrative procedures as to how a family would opt in or opt out.
Okay, so there is an ability for a parent to make that decision. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Schiff. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you for requiring that athletic coaches and sponsors of extracurricular activities involving outdoor practices or events shall complete annual training and exertional heat stroke. That's an important part and a policy change that I will definitely support. I am uncomfortable with the way that the rest of the changes are written. It says any student wanting to participate in middle school and/or high school athletics must complete the cardiology report, and then there's a colon there. I think that's misleading because underneath that in B, it says part of that is decline the electrocardiogram screening each year of athletic participation. So saying that they must complete a cardiology report may not be clear, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable. I'm trying to understand why that needs to be in our board policy in general. I see that there is an ability for parents to opt out, but I think that it could be written in a way that is more clear as to exactly what that cardiology report is.
Through the chair, yeah, so thinking about Neola and the way our policies are, you've got the global policy, and then you get to the administrative procedure that we could get more specific with it then in that, the language you're talking about, and then in the form that they've got to submit if they wanted to opt out. We can, the beauty about coming to this the way it is bringing it to you now, and we're talking about it. I mean, we can go in and wordsmith this some and then bring it back and so forth well before the public hearing. So we'll take a look at both of those, and if we'll probably bring back 2 samples, one with language in this, and the other with the language staying the way it is, but then the language in the administrative procedure.
Okay, I mean, we have a waiver that students have to fill out in order to participate in athletics, so I'm just not sure why this wouldn't just be added to that waiver, why it's being done in this way. And I'm going to continue to question it, to be honest with you, because while this is a wonderful thing, and I think it is important to make parents aware of the fact that there is a chance that their child may have a problem with their heart they're unaware of, I think that, again, it's a slippery slope, and every time we keep making policies about requiring things or requiring things from parents, I just want to be really mindful of that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I questioned that B as well. I requested that it be deleted, take it out, and then I was informed of
Well, I'm not
what
questioning
Mrs.
B, I think it's important it's there.
And then what I was informed of is Mrs. DiAgresta's advice to us on that. But I would prefer to have it deleted as well. There are some, my thought is, or maybe this is a question, I'm not sure. There are some referenced statutes on the tail end of this. I'm wondering if those already have that language of, wavering out of medical testing, even for the general medical that students have to get, which would talk to what Mrs. Justice is mentioning here. If it's mentioned in another place, do we absolutely need to have that B? Maybe we can just eliminate the B, because it is true. I mean, we are mandating it. If we offer an option for someone not to do it, then we almost defeat the purpose. But I do understand allowing parents to have that option of wavering out of any medical because of religious purposes or whatever their preference is. So if there's a way that we could do that, if you can wordsmith it to remove
No,
B from here?
that's not what we're saying.
That's not what we're talking about?
No.
Why, but
We're
declining.
not saying
we-
remove it, we're saying that there has to be a record of the parent opting in or opting out.
We do have that already. But
So the
that's what-
question, yeah, what I'm hearing is that it's not an issue of, are they able to decline it? It's that we have to either have the record or we have to have a form saying, I declined this. That's what we're legally obligated to do, and we have to give that option. If we're going to mandate it, then we have to also be able to say, I chose not to do that, and there may or may not have to be documentation of why, like we do for vaccination. But that's a different, the issue is they can
No,
decline.
I think we're on the, I think we're on the same page here. I may not have worded it that way, but I think we're on the same page.
So what I'm hearing you say, because I think we are misunderstanding each other. What I'm hearing you say is that, what concerns me about what I'm hearing, and maybe you're not saying this, is the fact that it very much concerns me that it would seem that we would be mandating something for parents to have to do. That's very concerning to me. So I don't like it in the policy in that way at all. I would like to see, and I can't speak to this. I don't know how the athletics, I mean, my kids are just getting into high school and getting involved in that. So, but that's my biggest concern here is that idea that we would be mandating anything about this. I think suggesting it, and Mrs. Barrenbrook has something she'd like to share, perhaps she can add on that.
I do. I wanted to say, I like the part in the policy where it talks about the requirement for the coaches to
Yeah.
go through the training, because I think that's been lacking. As far as the policy for the parents, is it possible to put recommendation instead of mandatory? Is that a word that we can put in our policy?
Was this copied from Berard?
Right, but Vard has a different setup.
No, I'm asking.
Through the chair, it was not copied from Brevard, but it was originated through that, because there's two other districts that do it, Brevard and Osceola. Brevard does have a policy. Osceola does a superintendent directive. And the superintendent says, if you're going to play sports, you have to go through this. If you are going to opt out, here's your way of doing that. So we brought it to you as a policy rather than the directive. I mean, so that is a possibility. We could do it that way.
I'd prefer it as a directive only because I think, given the changes in funding and different things and the evolution of the organization itself, to be fair, there's the history of the organization going through some changes, that a superintendent directive is something that can be undone by the superintendent's decision. And in this case, I would imagine the superintendent would have to have a pretty valid reason as to why to pull it back. But a policy is a bit different.
This policy is not, we're not contracting with who we play for.
I understand that.
This policy is not about that. This policy is only about making sure that all athletes have a heart screening.
I understand.
So maybe could you clarify for us what you see as the difference between bringing it as a directive or as a policy and the implications of that?
Through the chair, for me, and I'll let Mr. Bass add on or completely change what I say, a policy is forever. And a policy would require board action to modify or change. And I think if we have the opportunity to save lives, despite who the superintendent may be, a directive can change and nobody really know about it. So in terms of what gives us a higher level of authority, policy trumps all. What I hear from the board may be the word mandate, and I would have to defer to the school board attorney. Maybe that is the wrong word. Maybe it is highly recommend, and if they choose to opt out, complete forms A, B, or C. So maybe being a little bit more explicit in the language within the policy may give us a higher level of comfort. And I'm just trying to summarize, this is policy, so this is the action of the board, so I'm just trying to summarize kind of what I'm hearing to get this right.
Well, I'm okay with mandate. I don't have an issue with mandate. I think it's
Mrs.
very
Berenborg
important
had
that
her hand
we
up.
ensure if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right.
Thank you. I'm comfortable with it being a policy if it's recommended and parents see the choices. Because I think they're still the parent. They still have the right to what happens with their child. It's not our job to govern their child. It's our job to care about their child and make sure they're safe. And I think by putting a policy saying that we think this is something that we recommend, I think then it allows the parent to have that choice. I think it still should be a policy, but I think highly recommend or recommend is a better term for me than mandate.
Are you looking for my opinion? Yeah, I'm weighing them both, actually. Because even mandating with an opt-out is similar to what we do, for example, in testing. You know, testing, it's required, now in this case, it's the board, not the state. The state requires testing, but parents are able to opt out. They have to know how to do that. They have to have the resources and capacity to do that, and it's a process. This is local level, not state level. And to be honest, I'm listening to all the arguments and I'm torn. Because I really do see it both ways. And I might have avoided answering, but for Mrs. Rosario's look.
Would you like to opt out?
Well, no, I'm torn because if it's required, I'm sort of processing this as we. If it's required, then there is a part of the process of signing up for sports where a parent has to look at something and take a specific action. They must either do it or actively refuse to do it and sign a paper saying, I'm not going to do it. If it's recommended, I'm not sure if it's the same level of attention. I'm not sure if the process is the same for parents whereby when they get all of those forms and you go through them and you do whatever it is you do, the level of attention may be different because when it's mandated, there's a flag that goes up if a parent does or doesn't sign. Like it has to be done before the kid is allowed on the field. And there's something then that requires a more active rather than a more passive parental engagement. And so that's a bit what I'm wrestling with. And I don't have the answer, but that's what's going through my head.
I just want to add something. So when your child is in elementary school, we do screenings, dental screenings, eye screenings. You can either waive your child out of it, or your child can participate in those screenings at the school, scoliosis, whatever it is we do. We cover those costs are covered. We're not asking parents to also engage in paying for a service. So I think I would be much more comfortable with having it be something that the district provides to every student and athlete, if you're able to work that out through Cleveland Clinic, and then a parent can say, yes, my child can go through the screening process, or no, my child is waived out. I don't want my child screened. Like my kids go to the eye doctor. I know they have eye issues. I don't need them tested at school. I'm addressing that need. But it opens up a whole nother area when you're doing it in this way, and I would just be more comfortable for it to be done like the other medical screenings. And if the cost is being covered, then the onus is on us then to provide the service when it's provided, when it's requested. There are too many open questions for me to be able to move forward with it in this way.
Yeah, that's actually a good solution. Because the cost thing,
It's a
My
question.
first question, actually, when I heard all of this, was about the cost and who's required and the implications of who's in and who's out based on cost and based on self-identification about whether you can or can't afford it.
And then are you
So I-
signing no because you're not sure if you're going to get the coverage for it, but you can't spend the money this week? And, I mean, it's just
Yeah,
cover
I
the cost
agree.
and then we can have a different conversation about it.
And so that brings up another question, which is, what is the cost and can we cover it? Or do we work with Cleveland Clinic and they cover, like, how do we arrange that? Because that's a good point.
Through the chair, if that is the will of the board, we'd have to go and pull the item and do the research to say, you're opting in or opting out at where the cost is going to be covered. And before we would put that into policy, we would need to secure that we have a funding source. The design right now is, as you're choosing to opt in to play sports, you're taking the physical, which all students have to take, and it's an additional requirement within the physical itself. So a physical probably cost, I know in Miami it cost $21, which is at a discounted rate, and for free or reduced lunch, the cost was covered for those that couldn't afford it. This is a completely different model where all would be covered on a yearly basis for all middle school and high school students choosing to participate in sports. So we'd have to review that particular structure and then do the research in terms of securing funding. And my goal really was to secure funding once it was out for community input. So it's been approved, and I don't think it would be, I would put the cart before the horse, or the cart before the horse, if I was trying to secure funding before the item was approved.
So I have a question about that, Dr. Schiff. May I ask the question? So Cleveland Clinic changed, right? Indian River Medical Center was changed, and Cleveland Clinic bought them out, and there was a number of different funding sources through the hospital district and different things that were covering costs across the county, and that changed. That's continuing to change. So for me, putting something in policy, I'd like to see us go the Brevard model and having there be a community partnership. It's to the benefit of the entire community that these children are screened properly. Absolutely, 100%. But if you're looking at covering the cost, that may not be sustainable over the long
Right.
term, which makes me uncomfortable with it being in policy. If it's a superintendent directive and all of a sudden Cleveland Clinic gets bought out by someone else and they no longer are a partner, well, then you're able to pull it back and say, well, we need to stop for a second and figure out another funding stream for this, because otherwise, we're going to be caught for the funding of it, which is fine if we're willing to do that, but I just think it's important to know what the implications are. $20 is the cost that people pay, but that is not the cost to have the service done. Are you aware of what the cost to have the service done is? $150. So, this changes things. It changes the conversation. I think this is good, but it's important to know all the factors, and I would just like more information going forward before I would be willing to move on it.
Through the chair, why, Dr. Moore, could possibly we retract this off the agenda tonight and give us the opportunity to do some more research, come up with potential funding sources, agreements, partnerships, opportunities for rewording, whether it be policy, whether it be a directive, and bring that back to you at a later meeting?
If we did that, this year is a strange year for sports, right? And what are the implications for the delay in this for kids who are currently in sports? I mean, is it going to significantly delay and have potential harm to kids currently playing?
Through the chair, obviously, anytime that you participate in something and you haven't got tested, there's that ability that they do have something that hasn't been identified. I know that we did have several, or do either of you have a number of individuals who got screened in Indian River this year?
120-ish were at Vero Beach in the last month or so.
So we're already doing it in a voluntary way. So, I think the ones who would opt in are going to do it anyway. So I think if we delay how we go about doing this, I think everybody agrees this is the right thing to do for our student athletes. It's just how do we get there to do it? I don't think it puts us in any jeopardy of not having it done sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
I feel like, though, we've had this discussion now that we need to send something out to all student athletes' parents. I mean, have we done that to make them aware of this service, to make sure that they're aware of it, and to then ask them, if you are not able to cover the cost right now, we'll cover the cost? I mean, we're having a conversation about something that I think really opens up a lot of liability, because at this point now, we've recognized that we're doing something voluntarily that we think we should be doing in a more organized fashion, but we're not. So what has the communication been thus far with families?
I apologize. I do not know how that has gone about so far, but I know that they have done it for years here. And I'm glad you guys came today.
Microphone.
So to answer that succinctly, we work with the schools individually. They alert of all student athletes and students of the opportunity. They sign up online or turn in the consent form. We show up and deliver.
And they alert them by
Just via
what
email,
method?
it depends on how the school chooses to do it for this
On
event.
district letterhead?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it's mass email through the athletic director, athletic trainer, and robocall home from the principal occasionally.
Can I ask him a question? Is it for all athletes, or because you mentioned football, but is it for every athlete that signs up?
Football seems to listen a little better, so I feel like they have a higher participation rate, maybe more buy-in from the coaches.
But are we
it's
sending
been
it
all
out to all
athletes.
our coaches, to all the athletes? That's my question.
They are sending it to all of them, yes, every
Okay.
time, and students.
I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that we're not ready with this the way it is, that we've got kind of too many open questions to be comfortable with this language. Mrs. Rosario?
I hear consensus, but Dr. Moore, what do you suggest? What do you propose?
Through the chair, I don't know that I hear consensus. What I feel is a need to define it in a way in which we can move forward, because the reality is, I think we've gone through the first wave of student athletes who have taken physicals, and we're getting ready to move into the next season, in which the bulk of the winter athletes go through physicals if they have not had them during the opening of schools, which probably the mass physicals, because of COVID, didn't happen in the ways they typically would have happened. So I don't want to pause any longer than we absolutely have to. So if the consensus of the board isn't to modify the language, to remove required or the mandate, to allowing them to self-select out on the form, identify themselves out for whatever reason, then we'd have, and if that's not consensus, because that's a relatively straightforward modification, going back and then looking at funding for all middle schools, and I think that's an important thing right now. A local school effort is being done at our two high schools. This covers our students on a yearly basis down to sixth grade, and I think now that I say that, we're just now ramping up for middle school athletics. Because of the start of the school year and COVID, we've pushed back that start date. Those teams are working together, and therein lies an opportunity, and it could be a what-if unfortunate situation. To say we provide it for all would have to reconvene, look at how we would be able to fund in a constant over the course of every single year. And it is important. And the reality right now is that schools would have been able to absorb the cost through their athletics when students had a financial need. And we were comfortable with that, and then obviously going out and seeking additional opportunities to offset cost or find those particular costs. We need to circle the wagons to say, all right, can we absorb the cost in a mid-year in terms of a budget decision? And that would be us circling back, having the absolute number, I can't even give a projection in terms of the students who are participating. So to give that cost. So I think my need need for clarification is with a modification to the policy and shifting from mandate an opportunity to bring the policy forward.
So, may I just answer something, Dr. Schiff? This has been brought forward before. Mrs. Berenberg was aware that it had been brought forward. Dr. Mandela was working on it with Matt Susan from Brevard County, bringing it here. There were a number of questions that were unanswered, and as we went through transition, Dr. Moxley did bring it up again. She encountered some of the same questions coming from, she had been in Lake and was somewhat aware. I think it's a wonderful thing if it is done properly, and I appreciate you being willing to take a pause to just make sure that we do this respectfully of all community members, including our taxpayers. I think it's just important for us to think about that. And obviously putting student safety first. So for me, a letter from the superintendent of the district saying, your child's participating in sports, this is a program we're aware of, would you be willing to, this is available to you, and we strongly recommend that you have this done because of X, Y, Z, is one thing. Putting it in board policy is something completely different, so.
So, unlike Mrs. Rosario, I don't hear consensus. I actually don't know where board members stand on this, and I hear Dr. Moore's concern that sooner is better than later. So could we just,
What I meant by that was keeping it as a policy. What
I don't hear
hear
consensus
is-
on that. Mrs. Justice
You
objects
said
to
you were
that.
50/50.
I said I was 50/50, Mrs. Justice objects, and I'm not sure where Mrs. Berenborg stands.
Mrs. Berenberg said policy. She
So
was
to me, that's not
comfortable with
consensus.
policy. What are you?
Well,
I don't think you
I'm
can
actually going to
call a
go
vote
back
to
to,
call a vote.
Loud.
I'm going to go back to Mrs. Berenborg, because I actually want to hear from board members.
Hearing everything I've heard, I think it does need to go back to the drawing board, and I'm okay with it being a policy moving forward. I think the language needs to be a little bit clearer because of the cost factor and because of the opt-out factor for parents. I think parents need to be the driving force of what happens to their child. Do I think that they should understand that we have brought this forward and we think it's extremely important? Yes. So I'm okay with it if it's a policy, but I think it does need to be reworked.
So can I ask you, and this might be what you were going to ask, are you okay with it as a policy moving forward if the language is changed from must complete to it is recommended that they complete?
Yes.
Would that satisfy?
Yes.
Would that satisfy your concern, and would that satisfy your concern in the immediate, like voting? to
Yes,
move
but I
this
will,
forward
I will
tonight?
say this, it puts that burden as a parent, when I was a young parent and didn't have the funds, it puts that burden on you to whether or not to call 911 because you can't afford it, or to bring your child to the doctor because you know you can't afford it. And then it puts that burden on you of, am I opting out and risking my child's life because I can't afford it? And I don't want to put a parent in that position.
So also what I hear is, if we were to bring this forward as a policy, we can always change a policy, but we get something in writing now that enables the superintendent to move forward to minimize current risk. Because what I also hear you saying is, and I heard Mrs. Justice allude to, if we've identified that there's a risk, it is also incumbent on us to address that. This enables you to do that, and if over time we find out additional information, we can change the policy. That's our prerogative.
Yeah, we can change policy. I'm not comfortable right now with how it is. I agree that it needs to be reworked.
But that's my question.
Yeah.
What I hear Dr. Moore saying is, we can go back right now, change a few words, bring it back tonight, and would that satisfy your concern? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you.
Through the chair, that is exactly what I proffered, yes.
Yes, and in that wording, would there be something about the cost?
Through the chair, just in complete transparency, I would hate to rush to put something in there
Right.
about cost and not have the correct, and have that information correct.
I can't, then I have a real question as to why you would support it continuing on tonight with so many variables that you don't know and can't control right now,
Such as,
how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to implement it. I mean, there are a lot of unanswered questions right now.
in terms of implementing, I think it's relatively straightforward. Cost is as it's written, those who could not afford it, we would cover the cost, which would be through the internal organization.
And you're using what as we cannot afford it?
Because you're absorbing the cost of all
What's the
students.
indicator?
The indicator would be free and reduced lunch.
So why don't we do that with eyeglasses and vision screening?
Because funded through outside sources.
Okay, and why don't we do that with like the scoliosis or the hearing? Why do all kids get it?
Because students are having those screenings, totally. These students are opting in to play sports.
I'm not going to be here tonight, so I'm not going to be able to vote on this with you, but I have real concerns about extra layers of policy and government and doing this in this fashion when there are other avenues to accomplish the same exact goal. I think Mrs. Rosario's effort is good here, and I think that she should be applauded for continuing to move this forward. I just think adding policy for the sake of adding policy is not, when something can be done or in another fashion, is just foolish, in my opinion.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think that this is having policy just for the sake of having policy. I see there's a need, and I would just completely disagree with that. But I'm okay with the rewording.
Through the chair, I think
We could,
my recommendation would be we continue to work to make it policy, because policy will outlive all of us and ultimately save lives. And that's what I think we're problem solving here to get done, and I think that's the power of policy. I have learned that as it is written right now, it is not there. I do think I can require as early as tomorrow through directive to have this work done starting tomorrow and define what those systems would be. So in the meantime, as we wordsmith, we don't lose the potential of any child. I mean, we put together a directive that I can send to our secondary principals to implement the plan and continuing to wordsmith it and working with you to bring it back. And I think that's a solution that allows us to move forward directly with a level of comfort that, you know, through my directive, we can begin to do this work and then craft out what the policy would be so it continues to live forever.
Dr. Schiff? My follow-up question would be, are there any other issues regarding student safety that are not currently in board policy that you'll also task your staff with looking at to add into board policy? Because given that as the argument for placing it in board policy, I would imagine there are other areas that should be addressed as well.
Oh, absolutely. And we're looking at policies on a continuous basis and continuing to have to bring policies forward as we look at them, whether they're outdated or inconsistent. Or not aligned to current ways of work. To be honest with you, if it wasn't for COVID, there'd probably be policies coming on a monthly basis.
Right, so I think parents need to be especially in paying attention right now, because what I'm hearing is more mandating and more regulation by the school district as to what's going to happen regarding their students, and it's going to be done by board members. So parents better be paying attention to what policies the school district are bringing forward that are going to affect their children's education and ability to interact in the school district.
Dr. Schiff.
Yeah,
Can I
Mrs.
speak?
Sample.
Yeah, I think we're talking about something that's not mandatory for all children. Sports is not mandatory. This is an extracurricular activity.
That's what I think
But
isn't
I will
mandatory
say,
either.
as a parent, can I speak?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So as a parent and a former coach, I will tell you, as a coach, I was concerned about children. I'm out on a field way away from everything. I'm worried about the health of those children, okay? We have had a child die, at least one, in our district because of this. And I think it's the onus on us to do something about it. And I think that, you know, since it's not mandatory for every single child to play sports, we're talking about an extracurricular activity. And I think sometimes, you know, you got to pay attention to the fact that parents do have to fill out forms to be able to do extra things. And this is an extra thing that's going to exert energy on their body, and something that's, now you've put them into this coach's responsibility, and the coach is hoping that that child is healthy and safe. And I think that for the protection also of our adults that are working with children, it's nice to know that children have been screened. So I do think we should do something. I don't think this is overbearing on government, because I don't believe the government should be handling everybody's day-to-day lives. But I do think in this case, I think it's important that we do put something in place.
What I hear Dr. Moore offering is a compromise. What I hear Dr. Moore saying is, I can put a directive in place tomorrow while we work on the concerns of the board to bring this back to us
at our next agenda
Yeah,
in 2
I think
weeks. Am
that's
I
a good
hearing
way.
that correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Is the board comfortable with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
All right. To the chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item is the five-year work plan, and this is it's titled the Five-Year Educational Work Plan. It is a document that is required by all school districts to be submitted to DOE. And just to give you my personal opinion on this particular document, this is our plan, our plan. A lot of times in my past working with DOE and Office of Educational Facilities, they would kind of dictate to us as a district the plan in this direction or that direction. No, this is our plan, so we can amend it at any time. We submit it by October 1st each year, and they have a record of it. The reason why that this plan is important, and it's on file, and you can go on and you can look. I believe the last time I looked is going back to 2011. They have an archive of all the work plans for each district. This is what DOE, the governor's office, the legislator, and your community planning organizations look at as far as your plans moving forward. The work plan is kind of broken up into 4 different areas. The first area is primarily the revenue and expenditures that you were anticipating not only for the current year, but also for the next 4 years after that. In a lot of cases, DOE has this pre-populated for you based on the COFTE numbers, which is the capital outlay FTE, and your tax generation that they are predicting. So that is the first section there. The expenditures is going to be what's planned for your maintenance, repair, and renovation. A lot of this we've already talked about in our capital work plan. So it's reflected there. And I just want to also thank Nick Westenberger and also Michelle Simmons. They got this plan out and done in basically one day because the Department of Education, Office of Educational Facilities, Violet Brown, if you're watching, I'm sorry. They are always delayed in getting this out, and I believe it did not come out until last week. As someone who has worked on this plan since 2003, it is not always easy to get done, particularly balancing your revenue and expenditures. But on the first page there, if you look, the greatest thing that I saw when I saw this was the difference, the remaining funds were zeros all the way across. So it is a balanced plan, and it has to be balanced to submit it to DOE. But if you flip through, the first few pages are the revenue and expenditure sections. Then you get over to your planned projects. And a lot of these planned projects, if you look, I believe it's on page 7 is where the planned projects start. These are the items that you all have talked about, that we've discussed with you, not only this year, but in previous years, that are on the capital work plan. The third section of this particular document is your tracking section. On page 8, really gets into the bulk of it. You've got all of our school facilities listed there, and you've got 3 different kind of categories for student stations. You have an actual student station, you have a satisfactory student station, and you have the COFTE, which is the capital outlay FTE prediction. All 3 numbers are different. Why are they different, you may ask? Because the actual fish student station is based off of your square footage that that classroom holds. Each 5 years, you have DOE staff that will come out and do a survey. And they go in and they look to see if the flooring is the same, the lighting is adequate, the size of the room, make sure there's egress and electrical capacity. They do that every 5 years. They identify the number of student stations you have based off of that survey. Then you have the satisfactory student stations, such as you work off of the actual, then let's say you had a lab that you did not have students assigned to. It would not be the actual, it would be student satisfactory stations, and you could use those, say a computer lab. So that's why that number is greater. And then lastly, the capital outlay FTE number is the predictor. And if you go through, and I actually scrolled through them today, comparing Indian River and comparing my former district, and DOE is always the same. They always short you on what they think the future is going to bring. I believe it had us at just over 14,000 students, which we know is not accurate. My previous district, it did not even have them close. So that's a way possibly to save a little projected revenue. So that is your tracking. One thing that I do want to commend the district on that I was thrilled when I got here to see, the relocatables. I would have imagined a medium-sized district, which is what we are, would have lots more relocatables than we do, and we do not. So that was great news. Also, charter school tracking is in here. Charter schools provide us their information. A lot of it is pre-populated and goes over from the previous year, and we make changes. DOE also will go out and do their surveys also. Then, lastly, the last section is going to be your long-range planning. Always kind of a difficult thing to do because we don't really know what the community needs will be 5-10 years out. We may have an idea. I know that we are potentially bringing a residential community project to you here in the upcoming months that will obviously increase students in schools somewhere, but it has not happened yet. So it's kind of like, okay, we think this is going to happen, but how do we project it out? So we do that for 5 years and also for 10 years, and also within that time, we're trying to project out the maintenance and the utilization of our schools during that time. So it is kind of a guesstimate, but Mr. Westenberger and staff have done a great job putting that together. If we get to a point where we do not have something in this plan and we need to address a facility need, there is an avenue to get DOE to come in and do a spot survey. Let's say we had an influx of students and we needed to add a classroom wing on a school that we were not anticipating. We could call DOE, they would come down, do that spot survey, and give us permission to build that. So here's something you may or may not know. If we had money, funds, to build a school, just because we wanted to build it does not mean we can build it. DOE has to come and give us that permission to do that. So it's kind of a checks and balances there, so you don't down the road see that you have more schools than you really need. So there is that avenue of a spot survey to bring DOE in to give that permission. So questions about the work plan here?
So would you go to page 4, which is the 1.5 mil page for the expenditures for maintenance, repair, and renovations? About 2/3 of the way down says qualified school construction bonds. So I see that number going across. Would that be for like adding repairs or big, for example, Sebastian River Middle, what we're planning on doing there, would that be considered that under that?
Mr. Fagan, are you?
You just mentioned new schools, and we're not planning those, so I was just curious as to those construction bonds, do they go towards wings or?
I think they would go toward overall general category of maintenance, renovation, and repair.
Okay, so it's not construction under,
I think it just has the title construction
Okay.
in it.
so those bonds would then go towards repairs?
Mhm.
Okay, and then also on impact fees, restricted funds for future capacity producing project due to growth. Could you explain what that is? Because there's $600,000 in the budget for this year for that.
Well, that would obviously be due to new developments coming in and developers having to pay that impact fee.
Okay,
So
so
it's-
that's from
source of revenue.
houses. So that revenue then gets put in here and then gets used for just maintenance and,
It
facility.
has to go toward the school or school area that is being impacted by the development.
Okay. I wanted to make sure, because, for example, let's say Sebastian has a community that goes in there, then the Sebastian schools that would feed from that community are the ones that would get impacted from that.
Correct.
Okay. That's hard to track all that.
Yes, it is, and that's why Mr. Westenberger and his staff are very good at it, because they've got a good track record.
Okay, so
That's right.
Go ahead, Nick.
so-
I think
so-
Mr. Westenberger has gone to the
Well,
podium
can I
for
ask him
exactly that reason.
specifically a question then about that? So I know that there are two huge communities that moved in down by Indian River Academy. How do those community impact fees then help support Indian River Academy?
So can I just clarify? Nick Westenberger, Director of Facilities. The impact fees, we can only use those for new generated student stations. So it doesn't go to anything maintenance related.
That's what I was wondering.
It's only for
Okay.
new student stations. So in the instant, the county obviously collects the impact fees, they provide them to us, we spend them within a certain amount of time, and that's what we're gonna be using. Our impact fees are gonna be going towards a new wing at Sebastian Middle School, because that's the place where we need to add capacity to. So that's the place that we can add student stations to.
Okay, so it's just because those two large communities then came into Indian River Academy's zone, doesn't mean Indian River Academy, if it doesn't grow, doesn't get the funds for that.
Correct.
Okay, I wanted to be very clear with that, because I think there is that misunderstanding of how those funds are moved. Okay. Because when you're talking about communities saying, well, we're going to benefit from having this wonderful new housing development come in, maybe that community isn't benefiting, but the district is benefiting. Okay.
Other questions? No, ma'am. Okay. We have 3 more items, a couple of which may be lengthy conversations. Do board members want to take a 5-minute break? Fine. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. It's 2:36. We'll come back at 2:45. Let's make it.
We're now at our legislative priorities. Mr. Bass.
Yes, work past a week or so to try to develop a draft legislative priority, something so we could have in front of us before we started actually working, and we could work through this one or not. We can take stuff off of this or add or whatever, but I felt like we needed to have something to start with instead of just starting with a blank slate. Just a little bit of overview. Timeline, just so everybody's aware, 60-day session is going to start March the 2nd this year, ending on April the 30th. We have general election in roughly, 42 days or so. So this year being an election year kind of makes it a little interesting in how things are going to happen and how quickly they are going to happen after that election. Now let's throw in the $3 billion state revenue shortfall that we are experiencing. So there may or may not be a special session, or the governor may elect to do something on his own. So that is going to possibly interfere with what theoretically and traditionally would be the reorganization, which will occur roughly the third week of November. Then usually committee weeks start pretty soon after that, plus new legislator orientation has got to happen somewhere in there. So really we're kind of just almost waiting to see how things happen and how they develop. But typically that would be the process we would go in. And then the one thing that I believe is going to happen is for the interim committee weeks, they're looking at alternating schedule. House will be there one week and then alternate Senate the next week. So it may make, our efforts a little more difficult and spread out with our legislators. One thing that I did go ahead and do is I reached out to Senator Mayfield's office because they are hosting the legislative delegation meeting this year for Indian River County. They do not have a date as of yet, but have asked that we be included in that. I'm not sure if we have participated in that in the past or not, but we're on that. Another thing too that Dr. Moore and I kind of had talked about, and it's something that we did in Southwest Florida. We actually had Alliance of Educational Leaders, which is the superintendents from the 5 school districts, university presidents, and we would have our own legislative delegation, and we would all come together. So then you are spreading out over several legislative areas. So power in numbers, all 5 superintendents and university presidents would work together. We would bring those legislators in and have a meeting. That's something that hopefully we could possibly drive. I'm not sure if the Treasure Coast is doing that now, but it's something I think would really be good and give us some support, because we've got to have the opportunity to have our voices heard as much as possible, and do it in a manner that is clear and concise and is not something that would be an outrageous ask. Speaking of outrageous asks, this year with everything going on fiscally, I believe is a year that we probably just need to look to try to maintain or hold harmless. Legislative budget requests, there probably will be very few that get funded this year, specific legislative budget requests, projects. I think this is one where, we're hoping that the legislature doesn't take from the categoricals. We would love if, worst case scenario or best case scenario, the BSA is left the same. I believe 2 years ago we had a 47% increase, or a 47-cent increase. I can remember back in the days of 06 and 07 when we had a reduction and didn't have anything for a while. Those were very lean years. We may be looking to come, kind of into that coming up. The areas of conversation that I have drafted here is basically to maintain, hold harmless, a concern for the academic progress based on the pandemic, particularly with school grades and so forth, to ask for, some sort of guidance from the legislator to work with school districts on that. And then lastly, the flexibility to allow us to use some creative ways to offset funding. One thing that I've brought it up to Dr. Moore and Mr. Fagan a couple of times, and it would be great if they would allow us to do it, but there is a provision that school districts can take for a voter referendum to let you use capital dollars for operational. Obviously, we did not do that and have not ever done that I'm aware of here, but it is a very nice safeguard, and it's something that possibly legislators could vote on to allow. So there are some things there that can be done to allow for creative ways to lessen the impact that we are bracing for financially. So with that being said, I, take questions, comments, corrections, edits, what have you.
Maybe we'll just work our way down the line, Mrs. Barrenborn.
I think we should all know that there's a little bit of a deadline looming. The FSBA has asked if we'd like to send them our priorities so that they can determine and look at all the district's priorities, determine what they would like to push forward. And since we're members, I figured that might be something you want to know, that there's a deadline. They've asked for October 15th for our legislative platform if we'd like to give it to them, which means we only have one more meeting between then, which is October 13th. So I just wanted you guys aware of that. The other one is to answer your question about when you talked about Southwest, we do have the Treasure Coast Council of Local Governments that meets, and I sit on that board, or I guess a group, and they do pull together legislative platforms between the different counties on the Treasure Coast. Okay. So you're more than welcome to come to one of those meetings. We can set that up. Okay. I do have a couple clarification questions. So I appreciate the fact that you talked about the RLE, which has been a concern. Could you, I'm not quite sure how this is worded. Could you explain that allow the RLE to roll up capture full value of increase in school taxable values? Are you saying make those, the funding available to us before November? Is that what you're saying in that?
No.
Okay.
And Mr. Fagan, you can, I may have to phone a friend here on this one to chime in, because he explained it very good yesterday in a meeting that we're in as to how that is going to impact us. And Mr. Fagan, could I ask you to do that again?
If the property values go down enough, then they will try and raise the millage rate to cover that, but there's no guarantee that will happen. So if the property values continue to go down or go down at all like they did in 7-8, that require local effort for capital funds as well as for operating fund will continue to go down as well. And they will only raise the millage rate a certain amount to try and make up that difference, but there's no guarantee to make up the entire amount.
Okay, so are we addressing anywhere in here then, trying to get the required local effort funds to be allocated in a better way for us so that we don't have to go out for a TAN in the future? I'm worried about a TAN next year.
Through the chair, the required local effort, yes, the required local effort and the TAN are two separate issues. One is
Right.
cash flow and one is budgeting requirements.
Right.
There are some discussions we can have with DOE and legislation about this, but since it is all based on the collection of property taxes, which is when homeowners pay that, which is later in the year, I don't know if there's anything they can physically do about that. We're just one of those unlucky folks who are a net borrower, not a net investor.
Okay, but let me just put this out there. You know, in the district, we have to pay our salaries, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so if we don't have the funds, we have to come up with those funds. And we have to come up with those funds lots of different ways, through a TAN or saving money or putting money into different, categories to hold that money. Why can't we ask the state to do the same to pay us?
Through the chair, I don't have a direct answer for you, but the only answer I have is those funds come from the county, not the state. Since that is required local effort.
I understand that, but the state
they-
has regulations on how that funding works.
They could move up the tax bill, yes. They could move, instead of paying in November, move that up to an earlier date, yes.
No, I don't think that would be a popular response.
I'm just trying to think outside the box.
No, I'm just thinking of, how the state, the state makes up the rest of that funding.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
So why not have the state be able to give us that funding earlier to make up for that?
Well, your money from the state comes in every 2 weeks. That's your $55 million.
Right.
The balance of your money, basically, we collect from the county. The county doesn't get the money until November.
Right.
So the state doesn't have their hands on that cash flow. So it'd be like they would have to front us the money up front. The state would.
I'm okay with that.
We can add it to the list.
That's not happening.
I know. I just think this is so frustrating. You know, you gave us those list of counties, and it was more counties than I thought that are in the same situation. You know, what was it, 15 counties, I think it was, I counted? So it wasn't just 5 or 6. It's enough to say, you know, okay, this is going to be a problem for all of us next year. What are we going to do about it now? Isn't it our chance and our desire as a board to yell about this and say, hey, how can you make this fair? Why should our county that's giving more money away be penalized by having to get a tan and paying extra money because we're paying extra, the taxes for others? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, one suggestion we could offer, which the state has direct control over, it would be to say, since I am a state, I'm a county who gets most of my money from the county, instead of paying me my money over equal installments over the year, front load me with my 50 million.
Okay, so.
So now you're in control of that cash flow.
I agree.
You can say, instead of paying me over 12 months, pay me over 6 months.
Right, but if we're going to go to our legislators and we're going to ask them to help us with this, we need to put it in our priority list. It needs to be written right there.
And we-
Through the chair, I
somebody
mean,
else
that,
has
yes, we can draft something that specifically addresses it. I think it would be to our advantage to reach out to those other districts that's in the same category
Right.
and make sure that we are all saying the same thing.
I agree.
So, yes, I will do
Got
that.
14 other counties to reach out to.
Yeah.
You need to know how much it's cost them
Right.
over the, because it's not, it's maybe 14 now, but in the past 15 years, how many
Yeah.
counties has it been?
Right. And this has been an ongoing problem. This isn't something new. So this is something that I don't understand why people haven't been yelling about before.
Through the chair, they have been, they've just not been successful.
All right, we'll put it on there.
No, you could be more specific about the ask too, like textbook, even if it wasn't just give us 55 million, it could be give us certain allocations in bulk because we make those purchases in bulk, which would even help you in some ways with cash flow to a certain degree throughout the year.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Rosario? Mrs. Barrenborg, you're not done?
I think that's a great point. And if you could figure out exactly, you know, with your wonderful, you know, calculations that you do, yes. If you could figure out, because I think it was salaries that we were concerned about, correct?
Covering salary.
Yes,
But,
ma'am.
like she's saying, if we can front load money on textbooks, right? Because weren't we robbing Peter to pay Paul in the past?
We flexed that money before just
Yes.
because the need wasn't there for it. I
Right.
mean, that doesn't consider.
Or, like you were saying, allow us for categoricals to have that flexibility to be able to fund our salaries through October and November so we don't have to go out to TAN. I think if we put it in those words, so it doesn't cost the state money, but it allows them to see that we need more flexibility, I think we're better at maybe getting that passed versus asking for more money or money ahead of time.
Mrs. Rosario? And then Mrs. Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what is drafted here for the policy recommendations, it makes sense, right? So we have several of these bullets that are addressing assessment data. What I don't see is, and forgive me, because this is only my second year as a board member, you know, drafting full legislative priorities in this fashion. Last year, we had them kind of separated, right? So they were in these, one was in a special needs, and then there were some bullets underneath special needs. We had, let me pull it up so I can know what I'm talking about. We had one area that said increase total funds for safe schools allocation, The next category was maintaining funding for school facility hardening. The next one was for mental health assistance allocation. And then the next one addressed Best and Brightest Scholarship. And of course, the last one, we had transportation funding and ESE in there. So I think in the one that's being proposed to us, it kind of doesn't include all of the other priorities that are still, I believe, priorities for us. So I'm not suggesting that we are forgetting those other priorities, but I'm just kind of wondering, how can we still address some of the other concerns that we have or that are still priorities and include them in?
Through the chair, I think if this were a typical year, absolutely, they would be there. But based on people I've talked to in Tallahassee and the overall mood, it is just like hold the line year as far as please don't reduce any of the funding
At all?
at all.
Well, there was one thing that I have to process through that. I'm not quite sure, because the work of the district still I mean, I get it. I get that we are in an odd year, but the work of the district still continues. I mean, our priorities in terms of students don't change, and this isn't you. This is just in general. I just think that we shouldn't stop requesting the things that are priorities. Whether they get addressed or not is a different issue, but to actually articulate those might send the message that they're still important issues. But and I'm not moving away from that thought, but one of the things that was not mentioned last year, obviously, and as a result of COVID, maybe we might be able to, well, not because of COVID, but maybe we might be able to include a request for funding of the teachers who are not new teachers. So last year, or rather, we just got funding to bring new teachers up to 47.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was covered by funding.
No, we
State-
got the funding we got. We are mandated to use some of that funding to meet that requirement. We didn't get special funding
We
for
have to
that.
bring new teachers up to 47.5. What was missed is everybody else. So what about requesting support in terms of funding for bringing everyone else who is not a new teacher up to the percentage of whatever that would be?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
through the chair, I understand what you're saying, and, you know, and I'm gonna say it again, but if this were a normal year, I think that is something that we could do, but knowing that we're facing a $3 billion state shortfall, and looking at the long-range forecast that Mr. Fagan acquired, and also reading some comments that Jim Hamilton, who is in Tallahassee and is usually spot on financially, it is a hold the line type of year. And not that I don't, Mr. Rosario, not that I don't disagree with you, because I would love it, because just some meetings we had yesterday, it would have been nice to have had additional state funding to be able to take care of that need. I'm accustomed to only asking for things legislatively that you feel that they can be able to afford, and then it's like, where do you fall in the pecking order as far as their priorities? And I just don't think there's going to be any money for any special projects or any addition to categoricals for funding. It does not mean that our priorities have changed at all as far as safe schools, mental health, digital classroom dollar. Our priorities are still the same, but legislatively, what is our ask?
So this was created, but board did not have, I didn't have input in creating this.
No, ma'am, I just gave you a draft.
No,
I just gave you somewhere to start.
No, I get it, but at what point will our recommendations be put on there? And if
Now,
this
that's what
is
we're
the-
doing
Right now.
I know, this is rhetorical. So if rhetorically I'm saying we are suggesting, then accept our suggestions. right? So if we are requesting for something to be added, then they should be added.
And through the chair, if
But,
consent.
and I
yeah.
get where the state and everybody else is, but we should be able to add
Yeah.
to it what we find are our priorities.
And if I could add to that, that the way we do that is because we will come to consensus as a board. So if we add every individual priority, I think we go against what Mr. Bass is suggesting, because we're going to be lucky if we're held harmless, let alone don't take a hit. So I think our job right now is to
Have to
come together
discuss
as a
it.
board on consensus on what are the things that we would like to add to this platform that we have a chance of achieving. So that's my understanding of this conversation.
So how are we with busing, with the transportation funding? Transportation has been, we've had to increase transportation because of COVID. We've had to, transportation is one of those underfunded mandates, just in general from year to year, and this doesn't make it easier. I don't know how we can word it, but ensuring that transportation or allowing the allocation for transportation expenses to be covered or to be requested as a priority. What are all of your thoughts on this? I see everybody's looking to me.
Through the chair, the one item that I had put on there about the flexibility from other categoricals or potentially capital dollars, that was one of the things I was thinking of, because we're not running nearly as many of the double runs as we thought we would have to. So really, our transportation costs have not increased that much, but you do bring a great point. Always, the FEFP underfunds transportation. I think we get roughly, just off the top of my head of a number I remember, $198 to $200 per student for transportation, and that is not even come remotely close to the cost for the driver, cost for the bus aid, cost for the wear and tear on the vehicle, and the cost for the fuel, plus all the additional ancillary things that go along with it that I didn't name.
Through the chair, approximately we spend about $5.5 million and get about $3.4 million. Somewhere around 40 to 5%.
May I just finish my last? Thank you for that. My last, I hear you. I'm just going to put out there my other, my priority here is one that we've talked about quite often, and that is ensuring that our school choice is not forgotten in this. Being able to maintain our virtual school, being able to ensure that we can offer the high-level quality education through our virtual programs is a priority for me. I don't know how you all feel about it. I'm glad that we were able to increase that capacity this year because of COVID, but I think moving forward, this might be the wave of the future for us here. As school options are approaching parents, I don't want to lose any parents. So if we can improve on our school choice and maybe somehow or another include something in there on that, I don't know however you would word it, but ensuring that our allocations or our support for virtual programs or the like. So if we have to go on another quarantine for some reason, shut down schools, God forbid, how would that look for us? Maybe we could be ahead of the game like we were in the spring and already plan for something that we hope will never happen again.
Through the chair, we can definitely look at, to point out specifically the virtual capacity. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mrs. Justice?
Yeah, thank you very much. When you were speaking about the capital expenses and borrowing from capital, did you mean like for maintenance or things like that? Because
Yes,
the
ma'am.
allowance is there. We do that. We have done that historically in this district.
Okay.
Beyond that, are you speaking?
Yes.
Okay, and when you speak beyond that, how does that work? I'm not.
Through the chair, I know Glades for the past 3 elections, we would go for a voter referendum to do a tax-neutral shift for capital dollars to operational. And our goal there was to not get into it unless we had to. And that we usually would get into it for non-reoccurring items. And it was just there as a security guard.
Sure, so I understand that. That's a whole different avenue of thinking, but there is some allowance right now for flexibility. But I'm glad you brought up the millage, because we did just go out to the voters for an additional millage to cover the difference where the state didn't cover teacher salary. That was one of the key areas that we said we were going to address with that voter money, that voter-approved millage. So I'd like to kind of turn a little bit our direction as far as, just for me, I'm not asking for more, but asking for the money that is being given to be allocated in a different way. And that, for me, when I look at the ability to meet individual student needs, is very important, especially when we look at our tiered students and the FTE, some of our students that are receiving ESE services but aren't receiving a weighted allocation. They're receiving a portion of ESE allocation that we receive. So I would go further and say that title is also an area where I feel like the money really does need to follow the child. When we have, if we're going to use free and reduced, if the state and the federal government are going to use free and reduced lunch numbers to come up with ideas as to what parents can and can't afford to do, and use that as an indicator, then I think it also should be used as an indicator of support for students, because we do know that increased poverty does affect students' ability to be successful in our classrooms. So that would be the direction that I'd like to see us going more towards, with the state saying that the money does need to follow the child. And that's been a common, that vernacular has become very common with school choice or voucher programs. But I think that in order for the school district to be able to do the job that they need to do with the flexibility that perhaps a charter school has or a private school has the ability to do, it's important for us to have that flexibility to meet each individual student need with the dollars that are meant for that student. And unfortunately, there are students who suffer because they are not being given their full FTE, because the FTE that we are being given for that student may be used in a different capacity to meet other needs across the district, and I've seen that demonstrated. So that's where I would like to go as far as a board member, and just where I see the potential for the district to have more flexibility to meet student need, especially if we can just dive into what you've written here for a second. When you look at policy recommendations to address impacts of the pandemic, and you say number 2 there, establish parameters and funding to enable additional time for students to recover educational losses attributable to the impact of the pandemic, longer school day, longer school work, longer school year. I'm uncomfortable as a board member with that kind of vague language being used in a legislative platform that I would be a part of. However, as we've seen with Mr. Meyer's department and looking at the type of outreach that they're doing or support they're giving to kindergarten students who needed that extra time and leg up after school, in after school programs, things of that nature. So really not asking for more money. I do understand what you're saying, and I think Mrs. Rosario's point is really good, because I think that it's important to acknowledge where the deficits are. As a baseline, to say that we are aware of these things, and I do think that it's something that needs to be held at the forefront. So perhaps there's two documents that the school district in the future needs to look at. Perhaps this legislative platform that's submitted to the state and representatives, but then also just a running roll of initiatives within the district that are seen as priorities by the school board at any given time, and when you have the ability to advocate in the future, that we're building it. Because some of the questions, honestly, that we're talking about are things we're talking about here. This board has mentioned before legislative priorities, and I'm not seeing all of them listed on this sheet. So I think it's important that there be some, the onus is on not, I think it's important that this work doesn't just happen in this bubble of 2 weeks or 4 weeks where we try to remember everything that we've done or we've been concerned with as a board. It would be helpful for the board, I think, if there was more continuity in the conversation. As far as some of the other things, so you're giving us this document. If we could just look at, when you say suspend use of assessment data for teacher evaluation, and then also as a component of the district and school grades, what are you asking for there?
Through the chair, until benchmarks can be established with the new standards. because we know, we feel, and this is also other people I've talked to, feel that there's going to be a decline due to the pandemic of student growth. And Mr. Meyer, am I getting in the weeds on this? But correct me if I speak incorrectly. But DOE may come out and set the benchmark standards, and they may not be obtainable.
Well, what would be any different?
But they may really not be attainable.
Right.
So just, let's pump the brakes as a state, as an educational state government, and let's take some time to get this right, rather than throw something out there that is just knee-jerk and, oh, we gotta have standards, and we gotta have these that marks that we meet.
So I think there's some other board members that want to comment on this, so I'll pause for a second. I just want to mention, I don't have a problem with this language being on there to a certain degree. It needs to be much more specific. And I would like to see it be, I mean, can we do some, like, just plain language requests? No, seriously, like, just plain language requests. I mean, we're talking to people, we're asking them for things that we recognize are issues. So, you know, just ask for what you're asking for. I don't know if you want to throw it to them. I mean, I have a couple other questions on it, but I know it's frustrating sometimes when you're
Yeah,
listening.
I think I want to jump in, and then we'll go background, because this is a huge conversation. And we still have another conversation after this one, or two. So I agree. I'm looking back at what we asked, our 2020 legislative priorities, and they're quite specific. You know, increase base student allocation by a minimum of 5%. Increase the weight of funding categories 251, 252, and 253. Like, they're really clear and direct. So I hear you about being cautious this year. I mean, the state is a mess, and we're seeing this, well, not the state is a mess. We've lost a lot of funding because of the impacts of the pandemic, and that's affecting all of the school districts as well as higher education. So I don't disagree with you about being realistic in what we ask for. I do agree, though, what I hear is the specificity, because I think this is really vague, and I think we had the same conversation last year, where we started off with a fairly vague platform and specifically said, let's be really clear and direct with what we ask for. So if we're going to go forward with something on these, like Mrs. Justice said, how are we measuring educational losses to the impact of the pandemic, and what are we asking the legislature to do about that? Let's be really clear and direct.
Okay.
What I also don't see in here, but there's increasing data suggesting this is happening as an impact of the pandemic, is the impact on the achievement gap for equity and ESE students. And so I would like, so up here where it says guiding principles, I would like in our guiding principles to be something, and I don't have wording off the top of my, on the tip of my tongue, but something that indicates we are aware that of not only learning gaps, but those are impacting certain populations more than others, and it's our job to be attentive to those. And the particular gaps where we see that are often poorer communities, marginalized communities, and ESE students. And that also relates back to what Mrs. Rosario was saying about choice and increasing options, making sure that we have options to serve either historically underserved populations or populations we are concerned may not be being adequately served. And there's data starting to come out about how this is falling out in different districts as well as our own, with choices that parents are making and families are making for their kids. So I would like to see us really specifically speak to that.
Okay.
The transportation issue that's come up, I agree it's historically been a problem, but I would argue that in this moment, we will have a hard time getting that forward. In a year, when if anything, they may argue back to us, we are using less transportation than we normally do because of our options. And so I don't think that's a winner this year, though I agree that it's historically been a problem and it's something that always needs to be in our thinking and on our agenda.
So Through the chair, I think one of the things that we'll do is as I listen to the conversation, and I agree, we should have a running list of asks. And typically, as you're reading last year's asks, is it still a priority? Has our thinking changed? And I think that just the truth of the matter is some of them may be still a priority, but we know it's just not going to happen this particular year. But I think in our theory of action, it's continuing to make noise in setting and getting indoors and having conversations and planting a seed in some cases. Take transportation as an issue. You never know when someone needs something to champion, while at the same time being very specific in this particular year. These are our priorities. This is when we're partnering with other districts. This is collectively where we want to, as a whole, push in order to protect all kids throughout the state, while at the same time, we have our own local efforts, which would be the forward funding of our districts and kind of bringing back information based on what you're saying here, more specific in terms of the current ask for this particular year, as well as the opportunity to say, if we had to rank our priorities from last year, which ones do we really want to push and push back on staff in terms of saying, where can we make relationships or connections, whether it be in Tallahassee or with other districts, to partner around like initiatives. And I think that's part of the work. Once we define these priorities, both, hey, we have a list of 10 of them. You know, we're only going to really be pushing 3 of them this year. Who are we partnering with these particular 3? What doors do we want to get in on these 3? As well as mention, 5, 6, and 7 in order to really build a level of awareness. This isn't always a one and done year. I think this year, in some ways, it is a one and done year because we're trying to protect ourselves around 2 particular areas: A, funding, and B, accountability. And they are both directly connected to the pandemic. Funding or accountability, we're walking into new assessments. How are we transitioning into accountability, differentiated accountability, state requirements, state watch, state action plans that we have to require as we transition into a new requirement as a result of pandemic. And if you're scoring children based on data that we don't have, but there's a great deal of research that predicts it's going to be extremely bad dependent upon where we are or where districts are, the different models. It's going to be a very, very unique year. But how do we not incur consequences or spend additional allocations based on the pandemic or additional resources, which to me is a differentiated accountability model, or the pooling of state support or district support, which kind of talks through what you're asking, pulling information into a school, may not necessarily need to do it. While at the same time, looking at the funding and the impacts or decisions that we need to make for a short-term effect, because we think we're going to get the money back in 4 and 5 years down the road. But in that meantime, we want to be held harmless and really collectively have a voice in order to ensure we do everything in our power to push cuts away from public education for us to maintain. And another one in looking at those priorities is matching the flexibility that charter schools have. And I think that is a key priority in looking at where are there opportunities for a public institution to have the same rate or level of flexibility that a charter school has.
I think, I just want to finish because I was, some of these are not different. So we're, in policy recommendations, you say preserve the constitutional authority of school boards and superintendents, local decision-making. Last year, we said support local decision-making, and then we gave 3 specific areas where we want to see that happen. I'd encourage us to do the same. Whether or not it's those same specific areas, it may not be this year. But we're not changing the approach of what we're asking for. We
Right.
want local decision-making. Here's how we want it. And I don't think it may or may not, I am not as adept in this area as some others in the room. But as you say, Dr. Moore, we're not changing, we still want the same things that we want. We happen to know we're in a unique year. is there anything that prevents us from saying, basically, we know we're in a unique year, we know we're not going to get everything. These are the things that are our first priorities. These are the things that we are always going to be interested in, and we're always going to keep asking for. We know that this may not be the year, therefore, in recognition of the difficult decisions you have to make, we are asking for A, B, C, and D this year. And that,
Through the chair, and I think that is ultimately where we're trying to get, what are our priorities, where we really want to collectively and strategically push across counties as we work collectively in Tallahassee, while at the same time continuing to bring a level of awareness or acknowledgement to ongoing issues that impact us locally. I think a forward funding, when you're dependent upon local funds with other 14 districts, is something that we haven't explored, but very unique to where we could begin to build momentum, and then someone picks that up and says, all right, I want to champion that. And I think that is our goal.
there was something I wanted to follow up on. I've forgotten it. Mrs. Justice is waiting. Mrs. Barrenborg,
Yeah, I wasn't done from before. I had just, there seemed like
all right, then
people
we'll go
wanted to share.
Mrs. Barrenborg, Mrs. Rosario, and
Yeah, I think the last part of what Dr. Moore said is very important, in that getting someone to champion it, because we can say all day long we want to do things, but if somebody's not willing to run a bill on it and make it happen, it's not going to happen. One of the areas I think we could actually make some movement in addressing impacts of the pandemic is in outdoor learning and recreation. I think that's something every district is handling as we have a return to students in classrooms and school campuses. What we're seeing is that social distancing happens to be extremely important. So asking for an increase in funding or CARES Act funding, continued funding for those types of things, that's an allocation that districts have never specifically received before, but it would be a nice one to get because we do spend some of our capital money on those things. Central Florida School Board Coalition is a group of districts that have come together, and I have been a part of that for some time, although we have not been meeting as of lately. That spans Florida. We've discussed that before. That's a great group to start with. You have Barbara Jenkins. It's normally held at Orange County School Board. She's there in attendance. She's well respected in the district, in the state. And they have teams of people that do work for them. Dr. Moore and I discussed a little bit, how's a legislative platform crafted in a district like Miami or Orlando? And they literally have teams that go and that lobby and that, write their legislative platform and that lobby throughout the year for them. So we do not have that, but that is an opportunity for us to grab on and use their power. Florida School Board Coalition, while well-meaning, has not been spectacularly successful in actually pushing through anything legislatively. We have all attended that. There are good things. There are things that are not quite as good. This is not an area where they have a ton of strength traditionally. So I do think advocating through other districts is important. So you have restrict the use of accountability measures, and then you have suspend use of assessment data and suspend use of assessment data for evaluations, on school grades. So can we take, those last 4 bullets under policy recommendations to address pandemic impacts of the pandemic be shortened or combined to a certain degree? And
Through the chair, I think based on the conversation, our goal is to go back and be extremely specific to what the particular asks are. Once I assess the board's interest in new areas, how do we go back and craft them into what is an exact ask? So starting a conversation regarding priorities and then coming back and being very specific, hallway conversation, elevator pitches, putting our asks together so we're all informed as to what they are, given the opportunity to pitch them or sell them.
well, and I think that it needs to be personalized when it's presented. We have to make this very real for our district, even when you're speaking with Representative Mansfield or Grawl. Some of these issues are directly impacting our students in very personal ways, and I think the more that we can approach this from a place of compassion and grace rather than a demand will get us farther right now.
Mrs. Barrenborg.
You're absolutely correct on that. I think that, especially this year, I'm going to use the analogy of parents with children. When you ask a child, what would you like for your birthday, what would you like for a holiday, and they say toys, that really doesn't help you much. But if they specifically state what they want, then you have an idea of, oh, okay, I know what they want. Same thing here goes. I think we need to be very specific, very few asks, and very personalized. Because I think you're right, when we're talking especially to our legislators, we need to say why. Why? Because I get asked that when I specifically ask for something up there, is why? And same thing we do as teachers, you know, we say to kids, why? Same thing kids do to parents, why? So I think that we have to have the answers of why we're asking for something, not just we need it. And, yeah, the transportation's always been a problem, I agree. I think this year we have to be very careful in our asks, because I don't think we can ask for more. We have to ask for sustaining, unless it's a specialized project, like you mentioned, outdoor recreation, things like that. I think that our required local effort funding and being flexible is a specific ask. I think that flexibility, when you're talking about categoricals, you need to specifically state why we need to be flexible with our categoricals. For example, transportation, okay? We're not asking for more money, we're asking you to help us be able to be flexible with that money so that we can cover costs. I think that's a better ask. Just like with the standards and the assessments, I understand where you're coming from, because we're looking at having new standards coming in, new assessments coming in, and I think all the districts are going to be concerned about that. So I don't think we're going to be specific in our ask on that, but I think we need to be specific in why we're asking for that. And choice aligns with the charter school movement. When I sat on committees, I would sit and listen all day long to education committees. I specifically sat and listened to education committees when I was up there when I met you. I was amazed at how many of those asks were for charter schools and how many went right through. And I think because it was choice, because it was parents having choice, and I think that the legislators are very interested in parents having choice and parents being the parent for the child. So I think if we can align with that movement of choice, I think that's a really good specific ask for us.
Sorry for jumping in, but I think if we do that, we have to be very clear in what we mean by that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm
choice
saying
is
being
really
specific.
broad.
That's exactly what I just said, Dr. Sheff. I said be very specific with that ask.
I think I understand what Mara means, though, because, I mean, while I have been impressed with some of the things that charter schools in our county or in our state have done, I've also not been impressed, and the reaction and flexibility in the pandemic really showed some areas of weakness where their students were really, they got the short end of the stick in some scenarios.
Right, technology, things like that.
Yeah.
That's why I say we have to be very specific with the ask. And I think the specific part of that is offering parents choice in our schools. And how do we do that? We need funding or flexibility with transportation. So that's a specific, as far as that ask with transportation dollars being more flexible, here's why we need that to be more flexible.
Well, and though to the specificity, one of the things that's been a priority for Dr. Moore is creating choice within our own schools, is creating the platforms in our own schools. And so how do we enhance what our schools are offering so that we're competitive? And where do we need resources to build our own models so that we are keeping kids in the district because we have spectacular programs? I think when we talk about choice,
Right,
we
not
need to
just
understand
transportation,
choice within the
curriculum.
district as well as options outside of the district, but how we expand our job. You know, our job is the district. Our job is our schools. How do we enhance choice within our schools so that we keep, you know, FTE's students attracted to our district because of what we have?
That's
That to me
exactly
is
what I
what
was asking
choice
for.
means.
I was asking for specificity with aligning to choice. And so I think, you know, that we've all talked about that. It sounds like it's very important to all of us. And I think you need to be very specific in your asks.
Well, and, you know, we're on the precipice of another conversation right now. We're going to talk about COVID-19 and some of the choices, some of the executive order, and then some of the things that we're doing with that. And I think that may serve to kind of illustrate or help us with this part of the discussion.
And, Mrs. Rosario, and then we have two more topics, and I don't know how long those are going to take. So we've got about 25 minutes left.
through the chair, this has been really good, and you've given me direction, and I know he's been taking notes, so we'll come back with something, this served its purpose. Throw it out there and perfect. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this is why I mentioned school choice from the beginning, is because it is definitely a priority for me. But it was not meant for us to talk about charters, or our comparison with charters. It was more for what we are doing and how we are offering the 3 options that we are offering. How can we make that better? What can we do to look at how we've implemented the 3 choices that we're giving, option A, option B, option 1, 2, and 3, and then saying, now that we have those 3 options, what are we going to do to to just enhance it, to make it better, to
Through the chair, and I think that's
ensure that assessments
part of
that are
our-
taken care of.
Our priority should be in looking at current models that are reactionary across the entire nation to a pandemic, and then taking a pause and to reflect on how are we really providing choice within those reactionary models that have actually finding benefit to students and accelerating and enhancing that, and what at the same time are we learning in regards to typical or more structured brick and mortar experience that we need to continue to enhance or pull back our students. I think what we're learning, because we have reactionary models, doesn't mean all students are not successful within those particular models. And if there is an opportunity to provide flexibility to maintain funding for those unique, innovative models and not be punished, because right now we're working under an innovative plan that was submitted to the state, and we're receiving full FTE for those funds. That may not be the case in the second semester. And then we start to lose pieces of FTE that we are generating for students who are not physically attending our schools now in these virtual models. So there would be options to say, hey, wait, we have self-defined across the nation opportunities where students are finding success, but we don't need to punish or truncate FTE for districts who want to continue to build that kind of choice for options. I think those are some of the innovative ways in which we need to look at exploring choice to expand where we have found success amongst this awful situation, while at the same time saying, hey, we need to enhance flexibility, meaning enhance funding for other students who are not finding success and need a more structured environment to accelerate them to have the same access and same choice as all students. And I think that is the dilemma that we find ourselves in right now.
It's interesting because some of the things that are or may be a need are things like hotspots, things that you could use in the here and now. I mean, other than laptops and other, digital provisions for kids, I suppose, things like hotspots, cameras, how do teachers use those devices so that they can get a full 360-degree view of their classroom. I suggested this, that came to me, I think I forwarded it to somebody, that I noticed that was it was a wonderful way. I mean, things like these whiteboards that are in the classrooms that are used as virtual views, and then you write on it, and the student can actually write on it. So it gives the student in the dual classroom, the teacher who's teaching both live and virtual at the same time, it gives the virtual student the feel as if they're actually in the room live. So those kinds of technologies are things that I think, need to, which I'm sure you are, evaluate how can we, like you just mentioned, how can we make our virtual model and some of our choice that we're currently offering better and different. I don't know if we would put those in legislative priority. Maybe we would, and include it in, some. I don't know how, but certainly those are things that I have noticed are a need, and maybe we can word those within the impacts of the pandemic. As a result of pandemic, we realize that these are some areas of need for us, and this is what that looks like. Some of the areas of need with after-school funding, or because of this, we've had to increase our transportation, and we need to socially distance on buses, and that has caused a problem for us financially. I do have a question, though, that was originally why I had my hands up, and it had to do with the last two in the center bullets, suspend use of assessment. Mrs. Justice mentioned it earlier, and someone else mentioned it as well. So what I didn't, it just dawned on me, suspend the use of assessment data as a component of teacher evaluation, and then under that as a component of district and school grades with the new benchmarks. So a couple of questions that were not answered is, if we are to suspend these, what are we going to use instead? If we're asking for a suspension on them, what will that look like?
Through the chair, as we don't apply it. So we have the assessments. I think the ask there would be, when you pull together the school grade, the additional requirements that may happen as a result of a D or a decline, the state requires you to take additional action, completing a school improvement process, working with the state, not applying that accountability for 1 year. Very similar to what we did when we moved into FSA. There was a hold harmless year. So as you recall, they changed the standards in schools drastically across the state, went from an A to a C or from a D to an F, but there was a hold harmless year as we right size or align instruction to those new standards. And that would be kind of taking that ask to make it more specific in saying we understand there's going to be a reaction to the pandemic in terms of outcome, but we don't need the additional requirement and oversight and involvement from individuals from the state to guide our work as we recoup that over the course of the next year.
So an example of a specific would would it be suspend the use of state assessment data? Because we're still using local assessment
We
data.
use suspend the consequences
Okay.
of accountability outcomes, which
Got
would
it.
be school grades. So as we draw that down to be more specific, that's probably what that would look like. And we probably refer back to the exact same language that was created in what was a hold harmless year. So they graded schools, but there was no consequences as a result of, other than the fact that, when you grade a school, there's always going to be perception consequences that supersede,
Yeah.
anything else.
So assuming that the new benchmarks will be coming out soon, this year, hopefully, who knows when, how about considering the fact that we need training in advance, funding for the training for the new benchmarks? And then how is that going to impact virtual learning as well? So maybe we can include something along the lines of, I don't know.
Chair, we could copy a ask that was made. State did provide additional professional development dollars when we transitioned into
The new
FSA. And
yeah.
it was given to the districts, very similar to CARES. Each district had to write a plan on how you were going to support educators, your teachers, the ones who stand in the classroom,
And
to
now we
help
have the
them
virtual.
transition into the new standards, which would be, Mr. Mark, correct me if I'm probably not this upcoming summer or the next summer?
The ELA standards are intended to be implemented next year in grades K through 2. The Department of Education does have in their LBR that goes to the State Board tomorrow a request for funding to do exactly what you said. So I think that if we are also speaking that same language in alignment with them, that that's something that we need, then it would be more likely to occur.
Oh, that's good.
Following up with that, the next year is 3 through 12, and that's the year that the assessments should begin as well. So we have a couple of years to get to where we're assessing on the new standards. But next year, we are supposed to be implementing in some of our classrooms.
Okay, so if we were to add something along those lines, it would only support the work of the state with the need
Which
that
is
we have.
uncertain, right? I mean, they're just asking for it as well
Right.
from the legislature. So I think it is a recognized need that we would all
Okay. Awesome.
share.
Okay, are we done with this one for now? Thought for a second we started the next conversation. So, we have two more items and
All right,
You leave
so
15
what we will do,
minutes?
just to bring closure to this, we will, as staff, circle back, modify, pull in statements from last year, be very, very specific, and then when we come back together, really just ask the board to prioritize these items. So I don't think some may fall off, but we'll look at the items that are very specific that we want to champion going into next year, or for this upcoming year.
Quick question, given that it was mentioned earlier that we're on a tight deadline, and given the FSBA deadline, if we were going to work with them, is before our next meeting, I think Mrs. Barrenborg said, is there any reason that we would want to come together before our next meeting on any of this?
My thought process in sharing the FSBA, the ability of them to champion legislative priorities outside of, I don't know that I would place their deadline on us to do what we're doing. I think we can provide it when we provide it. But I don't, do you know what I mean?
You said Florida School Boards Coalition, so I didn't know that you meant FSBA, but I understand now.
There's two. Central Florida
Right.
School Board Coalition is the one group that superintendents and legislative priorities, legislative staff attend. And then,
Right. So, however, irrespective of that, if we're on a time frame where we want to move more quickly rather than wait 2 weeks, then have it go back and forth, that's all I'm asking.
Through the chair, I think I'm comfortable that we'd be able to massage them out, so when we come together publicly, we'll be in a very, very good place. But as I begin to have those conversations, I can assess that reality and say if there's a need. I'm so far off, like I was in the last policy, we could come back together in order to have that conversations to ensure that we do have them done. I do agree, provide them to the School Board Association, but at the same time, we need to organize ourselves and really create systems within the county and relationships across the state, so we begin to kind of leverage those relationships moving forward.
Comfortable, if everybody's comfortable with the time frame, it's moot, it's fine.
Dr. Schiff, I have a question. Throughout the year, we have at times said to Ms. Esplin, could you add that to a running list of our legislative priorities? And I'm assuming you guys have already checked with Ms. Esplin for that list, and you used it to compile this. If you haven't done that, you may want to do that. You have that list? A couple things, couple items? Okay, that might be helpful.
We will do that. So the next item, and thank you for your feedback on that. The Executive Order 2069 expires prior to our next board meeting. That is the order that allows us the opportunity to meet virtually. That is the, also, Dr. Suzanne, help me, allows us to receive public input in a different way. So there is no confusion, just seeking the opportunity to get feedback, whether we would want to, if it is extended, continue in this current structure or return to the regular structure, therefore not waiving any policies as it relates to board meetings. So if they do not, it's a moot point. If it's not extended, we come back and have regular board meetings. We lose the flexibility under the executive order.
I have a personal feeling about it, but I'll ask
I
board
just have a
members
question on
and-
the extension. There was that 2020-179 extension, did that not cover any of this stuff? There was an extension that the governor had put regarding the,
May I, Dr. Schiff?
I'm sorry?
May I respond?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. All of the executive orders that have been issued at this point were not specifically with regard to extending the ability of local governments to meet virtually, which is what Executive Order 2069 addressed. 2069 has been extended several times, but at the moment, it is set to expire October the 1st.
Unless it's extended again.
Unless it's extended again, which we won't know until
So
When
if
does it
it's, if it's extended again, then the option to meet virtually is still, would remain on the table.
Yes, ma'am.
So, but the question is, are we interested locally in extending the provisions that were allowed by 2069, irrespective of whether the state says you can do this? Or are we, as board policy, going to continue this practice, is what I hear you asking?
Through the chair, that would be the question that I'm asking. If it is extended, do we want to return to, even though it has been extended, return to the traditional board meetings without any modifications? If it isn't extended, it's a moot point.
can you be really specific about the modifications that we're currently doing right now?
We allow board members to attend electronically via Teams. We allow public comments to be taken via the submission to the email, and then although it's not, it has become a custom that we would read those statements at the will of the board, which we have always done since we've received them. So that, those are the accommodations, Mr. Gress, unless I'm
Yes,
missing it.
yes, correct, I agree.
And the seating behind us, behind you.
The social distancing, I think we would keep the social distancing seating as we keep in all of our buildings, just to adhere to those particular policies, but allow individuals in. We haven't had an opportunity yet where in this structure, we couldn't allow individuals in.
Do we know, and usually I'm pretty good at following up on the numbers that are put out by the Health Department and the CDC before our meetings, just so that I'm aware of them, and of course, today I did not. Do we know what our numbers look like? From what I understand, our numbers look good, much better than ever, I think, but don't hold me to that. I don't know if we can find out.
Through
The
chair,
reason why, and
good, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, no, that's okay. One of the concern here, it's not a concern. I don't really have a preference either way, to be honest with you. Except I'd like the flexibility. For example, last week my son got really sick. And I knew he had a cold. It was just a cold, but he did exhibit some fever. And he was just, I needed to take him to the doctor. And as a result, my son had to have a COVID test. Right? In an event like that, I was expected to come back to work today, physically in, but God forbid he got sick, then I would have to quarantine again for 2 weeks. And prior to that, I was quarantined because I traveled, which I understand. So how do we make it where we're coming into work, but, you know, there's still the understanding that what if, God forbid, somebody gets sick? Or it's the same kind of concerns that we have in our schools, where if you're exposed, you believe you've been exposed, we don't want you to come here to a board meeting and expose the rest of us, right? I think we need to have a little bit of flexibility in that, and how do we do that under these circumstances? I don't know if I'm even,
I'm curious as to why we're having this conversation before the next conversation, because I feel like they are hand in hand. I mean, where the county is on numbers, COVID numbers, is a big part of the next agenda item.
yeah, maybe
Well,
not.
but
I think his next agenda item might be specific to schools, but let's
Right.
not get ahead.
And I might suggest that we don't know that, and that it does continue to fluctuate, and that there is the possibility of infection in the county, and that we do have teachers and students and family members who have been affected by this. I would argue for the most flexible policy possible, given that we don't know day to day, week to week, what it looks like. And I certainly would not want to be one to say, despite being sick, you must either
Right.
come to the board or you must sit on the dais, which puts all of us at risk. That would be my personal preference. Mrs.
And he was
Fairbourne.
negative, by the way.
Okay.
Just saying.
But had that test been yesterday, by today,
Yeah,
he wouldn't
no,
have
I
known that.
wouldn't, I wouldn't have come in. I would have used common sense, and I
Right,
wouldn't
well,
have
and the
been
point
here.
is, do we keep
Thank you.
teams available for that
No,
reason? I would argue absolutely. Mrs. Barrenborn?
Thank you. There have been 3 factors that I've always looked at, and I know we've talked about this before: the CDC, right? The American Academy of Pediatrics, and our local health department, and what's happening in our county. And, you know, I went on the CDC's website a little while ago, and curious as to why they haven't updated it at all, you know? Because it's August 7th, that's the last update that has anything to do with masks, which it's interesting because they did have an update yesterday about COVID and how it spreads. So
But they changed that, though. That was a
reevaluating all their
mistake.
numbers. Oh, was that, okay.
They rolled it back. That was a draft.
The misinformation that's coming out, even of the CDC, is
Exactly.
frustrating. And I think it's all frustrating for all of us. But I think that we need to continue to follow whatever we've been following. And if we're following what the state is saying to do, then that's what we should do. If they're saying that this continues, we continue. If it says it stops, we stop. And I think that we're never going to be in trouble if we don't go off on a tangent on our own, and yet we follow the guidelines of the CDC and what the state is telling us to do.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the CDC issued something, and then it was about COVID and social distancing and 6 feet, and then they decided that that was a mistake, and they rolled it back. So the CDC at this point has lost an enormous amount of credibility amongst Americans. The local health department is another area of concern for me personally. I had an incident with my son recently, and as many people know, I know other families have also dealt with this idea of the local health department and their role in decision-making in the school district of Indian River County, which is nil. They are able to give recommendations, but at no point are they able to direct this board or this superintendent to do anything, really. I have some real issues about the way we quarantine because, you know, there are students in the fourth row of a classroom, and the first 3 rows are quarantined, and the fourth row, fifth row, sixth row aren't, and, you know, so we're making decisions. I have an issue with picking some things that we like and picking other things that we don't like. So we're okay with, you know, continuing social distancing with seats in here, but we are going to do away. The idea that we would pick some and not others is confusing to me. If we follow certain guidelines, we follow them. If we don't, we don't. COVID numbers, there are 2 COVID patients in the ICU currently. I happen to be aware of one that's 102, I believe. So, you know, we are consistently seeing that this pandemic is affecting people with comorbidities, and age is one of the factors of people. Our students are not in that category. And so, as far as board members attending virtually, board members have always been able to attend via phone. I think that the work of the board is done better when we are in person. I think it's ideal for board members to be here in person. However, given what Mrs. Rosario said in other circumstances, you know, should you be able to attend virtually? I think that is allowed within the law as it stands right now to attend virtually, whether it's on a screen or just on the phone is really, and perhaps Ms. DeGresta can speak to that. But board members are allowed to attend board meetings and vote virtually.
And that is what the Executive Order 2069 did, is it waived the legal obligation for a quorum of a local government to be physically present in the location of the meeting. So currently, yes, all 5 school board members can be in separate locations over a video screen. If Executive Order 2069 is not extended by the governor, at that point, that flexibility goes away, and we must have 3 school board members physically present at the location of the meeting, or we will not have a quorum for a meeting.
And I feel like that's completely fair. I have no issue with that. So I would not be supportive of having it be continue in perpetuity that board members cannot be present physically for a quorum. I think it's important that board members are here physically. As far as the citizen input situation is concerned, I'm fine with doing citizen input the way that we have been doing it, as long as we follow board policy about citizen input. And that means not allowing certain people to go before other people, not reading certain, that means not, there was some concern by some people about perhaps that one person was able to speak last versus when the emails are being read. And, you know, we just need to follow board policy. If our chair follows board policy, we won't have any issues with that. So reading citizen input emails, I don't necessarily have any issue with continuing with that if it's people feel that, you know, they're not able to make it. I think our meetings are at a hard time anyway, honestly, upon reflecting with teachers and parents. So, you know, that may be something that this board wants to look at in the future, in kind of modifying or changing, just from board policy standpoint, not necessarily, you know, because the governor tells us we have to, but doing what's right because we feel it's what needs to be done in our community. We can continue. I have some other thoughts to share. As far as the governor's executive order, just in general about reopening schools, which I know we're not talking about now, but I do want to mention it, Dr. Moore. I felt that there was a large amount of advocacy for teachers throughout the process of the idea of reopening schools, but there was really no organized advocacy for parents. And the governor's executive order saying that schools must open in a brick and mortar fashion, to me, was him standing up for parents. And I feel really strongly about that and standing up for students. you know, if the governor sees fit that this executive order needs to, that's run its course and we don't need to continue with it, then I'm fine with that. Let's make decisions. If something has happened because of COVID, I call it COVID lemonade, and we say, wow, that was a good thing. Like, we are doing that, and that's good. We should keep doing that. Let's just keep doing it, right? I mean, if it's not, as long as it's legally, we're legally able to do it, you know, we don't need the governor to tell us everything that we need to do, right? Other board member comments?
No, I agree with that. I think that, I don't think we should be doing what we're not asking our teachers and our students to do either.
Right.
And if we're asking them to come to school and be socially distanced, then I think we as a board, 5 people, can do that.
So what I hear is 3 people must be present in order to be consistent with the order so that there's a quorum physically present. And I hear people saying we agree that board comments could still be submitted electronically. Is that what I'm hearing? And read at the meeting.
I just want to say, like, if you want to
Public
change our
comment, you mean.
policy,
Public
we should.
comment, what did I say?
Board comment.
I'm sorry,
I thought I
public
heard you say
comment, I meant.
Public comment.
I just feel like it's a separate issue, like whether or not the executive order spoke to citizen input, that was a board policy issue. That wasn't an executive order issue.
Right, we're waiving that particular policy.
Right, so there's 2 different things you're asking us. We've waived certain board policies, and the governor has instituted certain orders that you're asking if we would like to continue to do, even if it sunsets, or even if it's not extended.
If
So
it
there are 2 different
sunsets-
questions.
Through the chair, if it sunsets, then we go back to the way it was pre-March 13th, which means at least 3 board members present. If you want to submit a public comment, then you would have to be here physically to read it.
No, so you're saying 2 different things. The governor's order handled board members and quorum and meetings, but the public comment issue was a board policy that we waived.
Both of our policies, so we're waiving both 2 different policies in order to
Okay,
do that.
but that's a legal issue. The quorum is a legal issue, is it not? I mean, the board policy part having to be present, is that a state, that's a statute issue?
Yes, that's a sunshine law issue as
Okay.
far as being physically present. But if you cast your mind back to April, in April, this board approved the temporary waiver of a list of board policies.
Right.
And it was attached, if you will, to the expiration of Executive Order 2069. So you waived your board policies regarding public comment and would allow things to be done virtually with regard to public comment. You also waived several of your board policies that have to do with how your meetings are held and the locations of your meetings. All of that was done as one board action to agree to temporarily waive all of these policies while we were addressing this pandemic, and we attached it to the expiration of Executive Order 2069. And I believe what Dr. Moore is discussing with you is we are assuming the governor is not going to extend Executive Order 2069. Since he is ordering people back, he's reopening the state, he's allowing more and more counties to go into phase 2 of the reopening plan. We just don't know if he will or not. And you have a notice requirement for your meeting, so we're trying to guess what's going to happen and still get meetings scheduled, you know, and so that's the discussion.
Would we be in violation of any statute or sunshine law if we continued to allow public comment to be submitted and read at our meetings?
No, that is simply a waiver of your current board policy, and so we could, if Executive Order 2069 expires and is not extended, and the board wished to continue having your public comment virtually or electronically, we could either have the board continue that temporary suspension of that board policy or just bring the policy to the board and have you amend the policy.
So what I'm saying is, I would make a recommendation to amend the policy, just in general. I know sometimes but there are hot button issues, people get really, responsive and start flooding us with emails, but in general, there hasn't been a ton. I think that there are families and teachers that we might really be able to benefit by allowing a change in public comment. I know it's not, it makes for a longer meeting sometimes and those things, but I also do think that you know, being physically present is a hardship sometimes for families at that time of day.
I agree. Does everybody else agree?
I agree with that, but I think also we're coming up upon having new board members on the dais, and I think it would be only fair if it's a policy change that we really might
We
think
could
about
wait,
that.
but temporarily, we
I'm
can
fine with it,
continue to
though.
waive.
No, I think it's
waiving
a
thus far.
great idea.
I think it creates greater opportunity for people to interact with and engage with the board on issues that are of concern to them. Mrs. Rosario?
If the executive order is not extended past October 1st, then everything that we're talking about now is moot.
No, it's not what she's saying.
No, I'm asking, is it moot? Because then what we waived as a result of Executive Order 2069, if 2069 no longer exists, then does our waive and our changes automatically revert to what it was?
The
Or
action.
do we have to take action? I'm sorry. That was my last part.
The action that the board took back in April was for all the temporary waivers of board policy to automatically expire at the same time as Executive Order 2069. So if you wished to continue let's just use the public comment piece as the example. If you wish to continue the temporary waiver of that particular policy, then I would work with the superintendent to put forth an agenda item where you would continue to waive that temporary policy until some future date.
So we can just do that then, right? We could allow October 1st to come if Executive Order 2069 is not extended past October 1st, then everything that we have agreed to that is attached to that executive order would also expire at that time, with the exception if we want to continue the waiver of public comment. Did I get that right? I'm just trying to
However,
understand. Did I get that right?
Yes.
In order
Yes.
for us to continue to waive that, we have to make that decision now.
Now.
Because October 1st will come before
Got it.
our next
I'm
meeting.
just trying to make sure I'm on the right
In order to
page.
properly notice the meeting, we have to make that decision today. That's what Suzanne and Dr. Moore are asking us for.
I'm just
They
trying to
will
get it
bring
right.
forth a motion for us tonight, right?
Right.
Because we have to vote on this, right? You will work together to bring
That was
forth a
gonna be my
motion that we
question.
can vote on by tonight to extend the waiver of the policy, correct?
Of just the
Of just the citizen comment part.
citizen comment part.
Is that correct?
No, he's like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Isn't that what you just said? You'll work together with the superintendent to draft something that will come before us so we can continue to waive the policy. That's what I heard you say.
Yes, but I would follow the same process as last time, where it was placed on the next board agenda, so it's properly noticed, not an add-on
Got
to
it, not
tonight's
today.
agenda. At the next agenda is one of your consent items to continue to temporarily waive that one policy.
That one policy of
So-
citizen input. Okay.
Given that our next meeting,
Yeah.
that our next meeting occurs after this policy may be out of effect, could we bring forward tonight, for example, bring an action item tonight to the board to say, we are aware this is happening, this was just brought to our attention, we would like to vote on it now, so that for the next board meeting, we are able to continue this policy and people, because otherwise people on the next board meeting cannot contribute comments electronically.
Can we do that?
Are we allowed to do that without noticing it?
So we bring a discussion, we bring an item for discussion, which,
But are we allowed to vote on it without noticing it? That's a question I have for
Would it,
our
would it be
attorney.
considered
Can
an
I ask that
emergency?
question to our attorney, please?
If a board member wished to amend the agenda during this evening's business meeting, that is certainly something
There
you
we
can
go.
do.
That's what I figured.
Right, that's
That's
what-
all we have to do.
So we'll amend.
right, that's what we've done in the past when there's been a discussion item. We amend
Yeah, okay.
we amend it. Now, do we have to amend it to bring for discussion, or we amend to add an action item?
However you would like to amend it.
Okay.
Well, I would assume that it would be action, because we're going to take action on it.
Correct, but whether or not we want to have any public discussion about it tonight at the business meeting means we bring it as a discussion item, which will then go to action.
I think we've discussed it, and I think we've gotten, 4 people here? So you have consensus.
Okay, good.
If Mrs.
I'm not
Zork is
gonna
here
be here.
tonight,
I'm not sure if she's coming or
yeah.
not, but.
So may I suggest, since we all are in agreement, I think, on this,
We bring
that
this up.
you go ahead and bring it up
Got
as a discussion
Okay.
item?
Or
Or as an action item tonight?
As an action.
Yes.
That's fine. Nancy? Never mind, I'll ask you later.
Did you get that, Dr. Moore?
Got it.
All right, clear as mud. Last item.
Thank you. Do have a small presentation just to facilitate the conversation, and this is an opportunity to seek input from the board as we have reopened schools, and we're coming to an opportunity to evaluate the implementation over the first 9 weeks of school. And as we're entering this semester, there's multiple factors in which to consider. And it isn't just about teaching and learning in today's reality. It's about providing multiple opportunities and multiple environments in order to ensure that free and appropriate public education is taking place, FAPE. And that is our responsibility as a board, as a superintendent, to ensure a free and appropriate public education is taking place within the school district of Indian River County. And as I look and evaluate how districts have implemented over the course of the last several months, there has been, in my own opinion, complete failures in terms of how systems or districts are providing that free and appropriate public education to their students. And my desire is to be extremely flexible in providing environments where all children can access an education where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, and they have the opportunity to connect and learn. And we have pushed out models, and we have used that theory of action over the last several months to produce very flexible environments for families, and have had an implementation that we could be proud of. Has it been perfect? Absolutely not. Nothing's perfect, but continuing to problem solve within each of the particular models. We now come to a point where within the transitional model, which is our option 3, which we have always communicated as an option that would sunset at the end of the first 9 weeks. And the way that I've communicated it, the way that I went back and watched, is that we would evaluate the reality of COVID towards the end of the first 9 weeks and allow the opportunity for families to make a decision. And I want them to make decisions that are comprehensive in nature. So we have the brick and mortar option, which does have 63% of our students. And at the beginning of the school year, I think it's important to note, moving into the first and second week, families wanted to return. They wanted to return. And we came to a point where we had to ask our principals to say, hey, let's hold true to the model in which families have selected, because we want to protect the integrity of what we have promised community members. And the opportunity that we gave principals is to say that you ensure that you're always acting in the best interest of a child. And if we're not finding academic success in options 2 or 3, then absolutely let's bring them to a space where we have the highest level of control to provide that differentiated or individualized instruction to meet their unique need. And principals have done an absolutely outstanding job in meeting those needs. The success of our 3 models really is on the back of our teachers, what they have done, what they have created, and how they have solved problems. The success that we celebrate on each of the models really goes directly towards the work that our teachers have done in creating opportunities for all of our kids. And I think that's important to note. So when you look at option 2, that is our virtual option, and that was, hey, a semester commitment. And meaning, hey, you're going to hang out in that particular model over the course of the semester. I have concerns about the level of intervention, the level of progress monitoring, the opportunity to provide interventions in that option. That is the standards aligned option. That is a platform-driven process. The ability of a teacher to modify or differentiate instruction falls to the wayside or in the backside of that particular model. While at the same time, there are students who are finding absolute success and really are enjoying that particular model in combination with the support teachers are providing. We are currently asking our counselors as we go through progress reports really to look intentionally at students within both option 2 and 3 to determine, are we doing everything that we can possibly be doing in the moment to ensure academic success? And when we come to the realization in partnership with the parent that that particular option isn't working, isn't meeting the particular need of the child, where do we work with the parent to shift or modify that experience, which includes bringing them back to the brick and mortar in order to ensure we're providing every opportunity possible to that particular child. And then option 3, as you know, is that transitional distant learning. That is the option, as you've heard 100 times now, in which we mirror the confines of a school day, bell-to-bell instruction. Teachers are there to provide that instruction. It is a classroom experience over the computer. In speaking to individuals just in schools today, I anticipate within that model that is closing, I would say about 70% really want to come back. That's my guesstimation. Where the other 30%, whether it be religious reasons, whether it be reasons as it relates to individuals in the home where there are severe medical issues, they just don't have the level of comfort and as it relates to COVID within the particular day. I can tell you, and it was very similar to the conversation we were just having, where we are at COVID in comparison to other counties, I think we all should be proud of. A 2 or 3% positive rate over the course of the last several weeks, with actually today it jumping up to almost 5. So if you want to consider under 5 a spike, which most systems consider under 5 the threshold in order to consider returning, in complete transparency, today was 4.9. Or yesterday was 4.9. I don't know what today was. So what we have done is ask parents to give us their input. And let me be transparent and let me just speak where my heart and head is. If I can create and I could lead the district that meets the needs of all, then I think that's the work and burden I put on myself. And I have seen in many cases, public education take blows left and right because of the system's lack of desire to create options to meet the needs of all. And I can tell you the work that this entire cabinet has done, as well as our teachers and our principals, to be flexible, to get this right based on individual needs is a point of pride for me and a point of pride for us as a community. And as we look to shift into what is the elimination of transitional, we begin to ask for that feedback. And 2 things you're going to realize: students that are in that virtual model, there is students who are wanting to return, and I think that is a good thing. I think there are students by design, because we're connecting with them and saying, hey, let's get you back to a space in which we can provide a higher level of support, as well as parents who are struggling through the lack of differentiation within that particular model. So we're seeing students at a very early onset of the survey who want to come back, as well about 42, 43% wanting to remain still very early on. My projection, and it's not necessarily a good idea to make projections in the midst of COVID-19, but I think if these numbers continue to play out, we'll go from about 63% of our students in brick and mortar to about 75% of our students in brick and mortar, which affords us the opportunity really to allow our teachers that we have on accommodations to remain on accommodations, which I think is an absolutely great peace of mind for those individuals who are in very unique situations to continue to provide support to children in those environments, while at the same time bridging or walking away from the transitional model and creating the new opportunities for all of our students with the choice that they now have selected. So I anticipate about 50%, keeping in mind when you look at overall numbers in transitional, we only have 2,120 students, and in our virtual, we have 3,466. So going from 62 to 75 would, between those two models, would allow us the opportunity really to be in a good space. If we're being intentional about finding the right students who are in those virtual models and encouraging them and working with them to bring them back to brick and mortar, or created what could be a blended space. And what blended would be is in your core academics, we would want more of a transitional opportunity to provide that differentiated instruction, and then in electives or non-core classes, continue with virtual. And it is putting at the forefront of each and every single decision the student and their reality. Now, what to expect in terms of as we're doing this work, and as I said, is we're collecting that information now over the course of this week, and we will begin to design a plan in order to move from where we currently are to the reduction of transitional. We start looking at the learning needs of students, and as I mentioned, we've been very intentional over the course of last week and this week, reaching out to those students in those virtual models to problem solve regarding pulling them back into the confines of the school, continuing to be transparent as it relates to what's happening in our schools, the COVID cases, our ability to respond. I think we've done a good job in sharing that information, an extremely good job of responding to those particular cases, and then creating a timeline that ensures success. The end of the 9 weeks is October 12th. So the new 9 weeks would begin on October 12th. And as we begin that transition, there's many things that we need to consider in order to ensure students are in option A on one day, and when they return the next, they return to a very smooth transition and provide quality instruction on the very next day. And we don't create scenarios or situations for ourselves where we're setting students up for failure or disrupting their experience as it relates to their educational progress. So as we collect that information, I think it's important to note the survey is looking specifically at each particular option, so it's unique to the options that students are currently in. It's collecting information on transportation so we can plan for that as well, knowing what capacity is going to increase by bus. We anticipate looking at this data on a daily basis to begin to design a plan and a time frame that would ensure a smooth transition of our students back to school, while at the same time honoring our teachers and providing opportunities for them to have the time that is needed to plan and prepare their rooms. And in some cases, there are students or classrooms that are strictly transitional students, and if you visited schools, you have seen studios have been set up, and as students return to class, our teachers will need the time to prepare their classrooms, break down the studios, and prepare their classrooms. And those would be conversations that we would need to have, and then bring the total numbers to the board regarding what this transition would look like at our October 13th meeting and how we're going to be able to phase it in. I anticipate using no more than 12 days of the next 9 weeks to phase in the plan. And why I'm saying 12 days is we just don't have the numbers yet in terms of students within the 2 virtual options, as well as the schools in which they go to. And I can tell you in some schools, the transition can be extremely smooth because there is the space readily available in certain schools. When other schools, the teacher's going to have to transition from the virtual to receive the students in the coming days, and that will take some transitional time, as well as looking assignment to work with our teachers to identify students remaining in a virtual option or shifting to a transitional, who's going to pick up those students. We will always, as we've done in the creation of the model, we'll look to minimize change, but as we said from the beginning, there will be change of teacher assignments. There's just no other way for that to happen. But we will look to minimize that, and I think parents who are wanting to return understand that is a possibility. So we're looking really to dig into this work, to be completely transparent, and creating a plan that allows us to transition the students out of the transitional model as well as out of the virtual model prior to, I want to say it is the 29th of October, which is about goes 12 days into the next 9 weeks, and then create a transition plan, school site to school site, communicate that transition plan in order to ensure everyone is informed and we have a smooth transition coming out of the transitional model, while at the same time meeting the needs of each and every single one of our students. So that is our presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mrs. Justice?
As I weave my way through the maze of words that you just shared with us, could you please be more specific to exactly what the timeline is and exactly how it will be executed? And for each individual, let's just take transitional option 3. Can you just give us the timeline as to when transitional will close?
Through the chair, we're surveying students this week. The following 2 weeks will be the opportunity for us to create a transition plan, and then starting the week of October 12th, we will begin to transition those students back into their particular schools, not taking any more of 12 days to transition those students back to ensure we're not creating chaos for our teachers or confusion for our parents as we transition students back.
So if you're a parent of a transitional student and you don't feel comfortable sending your child back to school by October 29th, what do you do?
Those parents are completing that particular survey, and we'll work with those students to remain in a transitional model.
Okay, so transitional meant temporary, and I'd like to discuss the effect that transitional learning or continued transitional learning is having for all students in the district. You've spoken about brick and mortar and an advantage. I, from personal experience, have one child who has not had a teacher in 2 primary classes, English or math, for the first 5 weeks of school. His education has suffered. The district has continually been aware of this. I am not alone in this. There are many other children that are affected by the fact that those children don't have, there is no teacher in that class. I got a progress report, it had all A's on it. It means nothing. He has learned nothing in those 2 classes. His response as well, you know, there's a lot of there are transitional kids and then there are kids who get quarantined and the teachers are, you know, kind of trying to figure out how they keep everybody up to date. So we're not moving at we're not really doing the same stuff that we would do in class. He's not alone in saying that either. Transitional is transitional. I have a concern that at the beginning of this, we said to parents that masks were going to be optional, and then we mandated masks. And as we move forward through this decision-making process, I think there are facts and there are feelings, and the facts of the way that this community has responded to COVID in general at this point where we are right now is fairly good. And we need to continue to open up our community and our schools for our students. So as we continue through, I'd like to hear what the plan is for making masks optional for students in our schools. I feel like that's important. And as far as continuing in a transitional model, I think that the idea that when you say student assignment may change, for students that have been in brick and mortar schools with teachers, let's just take elementary for a second, as a homeroom teacher tends to be fairly important in a child's life. Are you anticipating that students in the brick and mortar setting who have a homeroom and assigned teachers are going to have to change their teachers?
No.
Or is that a commitment that you're willing to make to brick and mortar parents?
Through the chair, there would be no reason to move a student who's already in a space in which he or she is fine. He or she is in a good place. Now, would there be opportunities to look at current assignments, and as if we presented opportunities to parents to say, in a new space with a new teacher, we can reduce class size for you and address very specific needs with children as a result of this opportunity to reset the deck, I think we would explore that, and those would be conversations with parents, absolutely.
So may I ask Mr. Meyer a question? Dr. Moore. Mr. Meyer, do you have any concerns about some of the education that students are receiving in brick and mortar classrooms with regards to the transition in and out of quarantine, or just the fact that large portions of the school may not be there in attendance, may be learning in a different model, and as those students re-enter the school, will the brick and mortar students' education be affected by that?
I think I understand. The one question is being, do I think the brick and mortar students to be negatively impacted by the rejoining at the brick and mortar by students who are currently learning remotely? No, I don't think that that's going to be a concern for them. I think that it will actually, as we move further through this process, it will just get better and better, because there were teachers, counselors, principals, everyone will be able to get back to focusing more and more on what's going on at the building. So that the further we get to normalcy, the better it'll be for everybody.
So you and I had a conversation about the teaching and learning happening in brick and mortar. You were aware of my concerns regarding my son and various other children, and we're talking upwards of 75 kids that are affected, 80 children that are affected in different classes, probably more actually. Not to be crass, but there are districts around this state that are having real problems opening and getting teachers, and there are teachers that want to come back to work who are not able to do so. Are we recruiting in other districts? Because if we need teachers, first of all, the idea that we would have a math coach acting as a math coach when there aren't actually teachers that they can coach is kind of crazy. But, you know, what efforts are we making to recruit teachers? I've been asked by parents, is there a hiring freeze? Is there a financial issue? So how are we actively recruiting?
Through the chair, we are actively recruiting a number of critical positions that need to be filled based on allocations. And you're right, we made the shift to ensure that the instructional coach is there providing that direct instruction to those students while we go through the interview process, ensuring that when we offer a job, the job is received, they're cleared and ready to be put in place. I think one of the things that we did is really look at enrollment as we moved into the school year in order to ensure that we're not over hiring. So we have posted those positions. We anticipate them being filled extremely quickly, while at the same time, from a district perspective, allocating resources, human capital, in order to help mitigate that particular loss.
So one of the interesting things about transitional versus brick and mortar for students, because I don't want to paint brick and mortar as some rosy picture right now, I don't believe it is. And I think that where there have been opportunities to place a sub into a classroom at brick and mortar and cover with a coach or a floating teacher, it has been done. I have seen it being done. And I'd like to know, it's my understanding that's not happening in transitional. Do we have subs that are covering transitional classrooms where coaches are floating in and out to make sure that the sub's covering the material, or all of the transitional students actively have a teacher that is a school district employee, not a substitute?
Through the chair, so we have the opportunity to be flexible, ensuring that transitional classes are being covered, and using coaches really to build the overall capacity within all three models to ensure that we're providing the highest level of instruction in a very, very difficult time. So looking at where we have open positions, and looking at using coaches to cover them in that emergency situation, as well as using district staff when the time is right to fill those positions.
So the one thing I'll end with is this, and I've shared this with Dr. Moore, but I'm going to share it with my fellow board members because these decisions will impact you longer than they'll impact me as a parent, but not as a board member. If we're telling our community we're making decisions based on data and science and numbers, we need to stand by that and make those decisions and uphold those decisions. If we're going to say it's a feelings-based thing, that people aren't comfortable with something, that's a whole nother issue. We made a commitment to this community to start transitional learning. We made a commitment to this community to have masks for a certain period of time, but going forward, we will encounter other illnesses, including flu. And the decisions that we make based on what people feel comfortable with versus what is best for students may be different. And there are other options for parents if they'd like to choose other options in working through virtual, the Edgenuity and option 2. And I just guess I'd like to know, transitional parents still have options. They can transition into a virtual model and stay there, or they may come back to brick and mortar. But spreading our teachers as thin as we have, for me as a parent, has not been in the best interest of students, certainly at brick and mortar classrooms.
Mrs. Berenborg?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I agree with the fact that we made a promise and we followed through. But I also think it's not good for us to do that switch before the end of the semester. So I agree that I think that if people are going to want to transition back and come back, they should. We need to get back to normalcy. And those that are concerned, okay, be concerned for a little while, but then at the end of the semester, you need to make a decision. You're either in the brick and mortar or you're in the virtual. I think that we can't keep going on and on and on. We need to have a stopping point at some point, as long as our numbers stay low, and that we're doing fine with that. So I think you're right, we need to do that, but I think we can't do that in the middle of the semester. I think that that's only fair to a student to continue, especially I know how virtual works. So you need to stay in it for the semester. And then at the end of the semester, I think is a good time for us to say, enough is enough, we need to stop the transitional and we need to go on.
I also think it's a volatile environment. We don't know what it's going to look like at the end of the semester. I just looked at the Indian River County numbers. It says 9%. That's, at least that's according to,
That's probably, I think I'm familiar with it, that's
it
probably.
may not be a daily rate, but it's on the Board of County Commissioners site. Cumulative totals, 8.95% as of yesterday.
Their target range is below 10.
The target range is below 10. That means we're 1% away from that.
But we're still underneath it.
Which we are. So we make decisions as we move forward, because we can go up 1%, we can go down 1%, we don't know what this is going to look like. I think we do what parents are telling us they want. I mean, I think that you are doing as good a job as you can in surveying to understand what is it that parents want, how do we best meet the needs of children and families. The clearest access we have to that is by surveying. They either answer the survey or they don't. We can't control that. But that's the best information you can get, and that's the information that you go on in making the decisions in light of the public health status of the community, right?
Correct.
We have to go with what parents are telling us they want for our children in the way that we're asking them, unless there's some other, if people come and talk to us, they can write to us, they can answer surveys. That's our best way of getting at what is it that parents in this community want and feel is best for their children, based on the data we have. I think we have to go with that. Mrs. Berenborg.
Dr. Schiff, at what point, though, do you recommend that we stop it?
That we stop listening to parents? Never.
No.
Why would she
I mean,
mean that?
that we stop what?
No, that we stop the transitional piece. Because yes, I understand listening to parents, but that's not what, we're not in the job of continuing to do this forever.
No, we're not.
No.
But
At what point do you think that we can stop?
It's negatively affecting other students.
I think we stop when we're clear that there is no longer a public health crisis.
You don't get you don't get a ticket for going under the speed limit. You get a ticket for going over the speed limit.
Yeah, Mrs. Rosario.
Thank you. Dr. Moore, I look forward to hearing the results of the survey. I look forward to hearing what parents are expressing. I have concerns about continuing the transition model for an undetermined amount of time. I do, however, think that there might still be a small group of students who might, choose to stay in that model, and maybe there's an option for us at that point to continue the transition, as you had mentioned, for a little bit longer for them, depending on whatever the parents tell us, of course, and also looking at what is happening with the numbers. I mean,
Right.
that's just, I don't know if we can
Mrs.
make any
Barrenborn and
decision.
Mrs. Justice.
Yeah,
Talking.
Sorry.
I'm still in the middle of talking. Literally in the middle of my sentence.
Please, continue.
What I heard you say, Dr. Moore, is that there's great opportunity for us here to look at the current models. I heard that you said there were concerns with regard to interventions and assessments, particularly with the virtual models, the virtual schools, classes that we have going on right now. I have mentioned this before to you about, how are we offering advanced courses virtually? How are we addressing the needs of ESE students virtually? How are we doing the things that we would have, assessing even?
Right.
Benchmarks with virtual learning. And I know that we can get there, and maybe this is a wonderful opportunity, as I had mentioned, for the legislative to add this to part of our legislative platform, would be to really not throw the towel away, on virtual learning, but to use this opportunity as motivation to make it better, to really stand above and beyond and turn what we have in virtual learning and really up the ante and challenge our teachers and challenge the district leadership and challenge what we have and fix some of the wrong that we may see. If there are pockets of teachers that are not, or students who do not have a teacher, we need to fill those positions.
Right.
That goes without saying. If there is a need for assessing and learning how to provide benchmarks, we need to do it. We just need to do it. But I don't want us to not do virtual moving forward. That's just something that I want us to remain on that path. I do understand the need for differentiated instruction, but what I hear there is that professional development in the virtual area might help in those in those particular. I'm losing my words here. In those particular, whatever it is, right? Does that?
I think
okay.
I got it, though.
Also, the timeline, with regard to the timeline. Have you considered, and I know that we talked originally about not, and the intent was really the first 9 weeks, and then we'll evaluate and see how it would go for the next 9 weeks. But what about January? What about Christmas break? Because if we transition students after the first 9 weeks and transition maybe some teachers back into the classroom, where is the time for them to transition? What I'm not seeing is, maybe you've already seen it, let's say that happens between November. Maybe it's over a particular week. I'm not sure. When will that happen? If that happens, even if it's for a select few.
Through the chair, we would build in that time to provide it to teachers. So through coverage, through assignments for students, look at innovative ways to provide opportunities for teachers to have the time to transition out of transition. And I think that's just the best way to do this work moving forward, give them the opportunity to do the appropriate planning out of one model into the next. In looking at the information that when it becomes available, I think what you're going to see are individuals who want to stay in the model that they are, whether it be through the semester or through the end of the particular year. And I think the reality is, putting time on something that is going to last forever may not be the not forever, that it lasts forever, may not be the best scenario. And I can tell you this, I will absolutely refuse to put a student in a situation that's not in their best need. If that's the demand, then I'm the wrong guy. But I will ensure that we provide opportunities to put every child in the absolute best place for them to be successful. I think at the end of the day, what we're moving towards is an environment where we will be able to meet the need academically, as well as the concerns that individuals have as it relates to returning to school or not returning to school. As I said, I think the overwhelming majority are going to want to return as we prescribed. And then looking at the remaining two models and creating what I captured as a hybrid model may be in the best academic interest of the children in order to ensure we're at class size at schools. We have the opportunity to have that flexibility in place. Therefore, I think that's what we should do.
Yeah, some of the concerns that I shared with Dr. Moore some weeks ago, it was making sure that virtual school is not only, is not an environment where teachers are simply facilitating, although we want to move into the facilitator role, but that there is still direct learning opportunities. And with direct learning, there really ought to be direct assessments, right? How are the students learning what we want them to learn? And if that is an area of concern, then my next question would be, who's evaluating that? Who's watching that on a daily basis? What are the assistant principals and the principals doing to ensure that teachers on a daily basis are doing what they're supposed to do to reach the kids? So there's kind of like this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've taken that advice, we've provided opportunities for our teachers to connect in groups with their students in that virtual space, so there is that intentional face-to-face interaction, getting a better understanding of who your children are and how they're progressing through that standards line platform. And while at the same time, already charged our counselors and our administrators to begin looking and having those conversations last week and into this week to pull on the parents' attention to where children are not finding success. And that really is what I think is what the game changer could be, is just not looking and saying, okay, you've selected an option based on time or based on your level of comfort. We need to also incorporate the new data, which is the success the child is having with that particular option, and then create an experience for them in order to ensure success when they're absolutely not willing to return to the brick and mortar experience.
Interesting, thank you.
Mrs. Barrenborg, then Mrs. Justice.
My turn?
Yes, ma'am, and I need to excuse myself.
Yeah, maybe this is a time that again, I think we should go to the end of this semester as far as the transitional part, but then at the point of what Mrs. Rosario was talking about with parents that wish to continue with that type, because there's two different types of virtual school. There's a canned virtual program that, we know is slides and kids sit and listen to slides and videos all day. And then there's another one that I think we're providing with a transitional model where a teacher's in front of them teaching and giving that interaction that you can give virtually as much as you can give. I have taught in that model, and I'm telling you, we've talked about this before. Other districts have been doing this. St. Lucie has Mosaic, and it's a school. It literally is a school as one of the schools in St. Lucie County. And I taught from Mosaic, so I know exactly how it works. And my principal could come in as a student and observe in my classroom. And I think just like you could walk in a classroom in brick and mortar,
Right.
they can walk in a classroom virtually. And I think it's a great program. They've had tremendous success. It works for those parents that are really want to be homeschooled but can't really do it, and yet it's a school within the district. So I think it's something that we really should look into as an option for these parents to move into. You've already kind of got it in place, so it'd be kind of neat to do it.
I think we're speaking the exact same language moving into that second semester, and that transition will be coming we'll come up with a better name than Mosaic, but that being.
I like the name Mosaic, though.
Okay.
Don't put that down.
But that becoming that blended model where we're able to keep the child in an environment in which differentiation can take place, face-to-face instruction, in core classes and other opportunities, yeah,
Sure.
as you described it, that's the option. And that would be the next phase of this work, and then being done with it. And to be very, very honest, I think as we transition this time, there would be slight modifications in January unless all of a sudden COVID goes away. Because the reality is, making these shifts pauses the support and restacks the deck. So we're, in some cases, done correctly, it can be a very, very good thing, because we can make assignments based on needs of students and skills of teachers to make those pairings, in which has always been something districts have played with.
Right, well, two things I like about it is it's a separate school, so it doesn't impact the brick and mortar kids on the transition part.
Right.
You know, you've got the schools separate, so it only allows those kids to be in a separate school, which helps. The other thing I like that Mosaic does is that they offer tutoring for those kids that are falling behind, because that's been a concern of ours about virtual learning, is sometimes you just don't get it and you need that teacher to give you that tutoring. Really hard to do tutoring sometimes through a computer. So they do offer that one time, I think it's on Wednesdays, that parents can come in, drop their kids off for an hour or so, and they get that one-to-one tutoring every once in a while. So, you know, looking at that as an option, I think is really timely for us.
Absolutely.
And make it a separate school so that it's not impacting all of our schools. Because right now, we've got kids from all different schools being taught by different teachers from other schools, right? And so when
Yes.
they're coming back, they might have had a teacher from Glendale and they're coming back to Beachland, and now they have to have a different teacher to come back to because they're going back to brick and mortar. So I get that.
Right.
But that's how we were able to do it with an emergency. But I think in the future, if we're going to continue something like that, actually setting it up as a school where you have those teachers, and it's been done. I've seen it done well. So I think we should do it.
I agree.
Mrs. Justice?
As long as we're going to talk about how parents feel and their input, I'd like to once again bring up masks. I believe that masks should be optional. The county commission has had several votes on masks, and public input has been encouraged, and people have been able to come and speak. I don't necessarily agree with the decisions they have made. We have yet to do that. We have been making decisions unilaterally within the organization, and elected officials should be a part of that decision-making process. I am speaking to parents daily about the fact that they would like their students to not wear masks anymore. That is valid. It is something that we have to address. And I would like for masks to be optional going forward. And I believe that at the next business meeting, there needs to be an action agenda item if the school district isn't willing to make masks optional, for this board to vote on the record as to what they'd like to do moving forward, because when we talk about accommodating all parents and student needs, in this instance, we are not. We have not been truthful since the beginning. I was honest with parents that came and spoke to their concerns and said that at the point of reopening schools, it was important enough to me to say, yes, masks were going to be required as we continue to go through and see where we were with the numbers of COVID. Our community continues to improve in the COVID numbers, and we do have schools locally, not traditional public schools, but charter schools that are not requiring masks. Masks are optional, and they have not seen spikes in cases with students or teachers. So I feel it's my duty to represent parents who would like their students to have masks be optional, and I'm asking the district to reconsider their position, or I will be bringing an action agenda item at the next board meeting for a vote.
Dr. Schiff, can I say something? Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that we do need some input from parents, but I think instead of just listening to one or two, I think a survey should go out. So we do get some input from our parents, because I do have some teachers that have also said to me, I was totally against coming back in. I was scared. I wanted to make sure I had a mask and the face guard. And now they're saying to me, gosh, I wish we would get rid of the masks. And these are the same people that were scared to do that at the beginning.
Well, and I think
Can I
teachers should also
finish,
be
please?
able to do it. Well, I wasn't done, I'm sorry. I mean, I think teachers should be, it needs to be optional for everyone.
Mrs. Barrenborg?
Thank you. So I think, again, it should be a survey that we need input to know what our constituents, Again, I don't want to make a policy when a parent is against it. So I want parent input on this. I want to know, do parents want masks? Do they not want masks? I want to know, about our employees. Here we are going back to this big, huge argument again, and I want that information. I'm not saying it's going to make me make a decision one way or the other. It will, but I think it's important to get input from everybody, not just listen to a few.
Ms. Dr. Schiff?
Yes, ma'am, and
I
then I
would-
think we need to wrap this up as
Right.
we're going an hour
I would
over.
argue that we have listened to a few instead of many. Parent voices have not been heard on this issue. While I agree that a survey would have been appropriate perhaps then or can be done now if the district so chooses to do so, again, we're elected for a reason to make some of these decisions. County commissioners have been put on the spot to make decisions about this. I think school board members need to hold our responsibility, and we need to be able to be willing to take a stand for what we believe in on this issue. Parents' voices have not been heard on asking for their students to have masks that
To
are
Mrs.
optional.
Barenborg's point, that's exactly what she's asking for, is to hear from parents.
We
So
have
if we're
heard
gonna
from
make a
parents.
No, we haven't heard from all parents. If what you're arguing is we haven't asked parents, then what we do is ask parents. We can't say we haven't asked parents, therefore we shouldn't ask parents and we should make the decision.
But we did that the first time.
And now you're suggesting you want to go out and ask parents, so let's
This is
ask
like
parents.
this is like national politics coming into play here.
I didn't raise it, you did.
Is that national politics?
You can't say, we're not going to ask parents, and then all of a sudden base the decision on what parents want. We didn't make parents a part of the decision-making process in the first
But
place.
she's suggesting it now.
I understand that. I'll be bringing it for an action item at the next board meeting.
Any more discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Survey out to parents before the next board meeting, so we have that information. Thank you.
Anything else? Meeting adjourned, 4:56.